Hello everyone, it's Dr. Dennis, and today we're going to discuss blood vessels. This is chapter 29 of your book. Alright, these are our learning objectives for chapter 29, which is entitled Blood Vessels, Arteries, and Veins. So, list the three main types of blood vessels and their general function, identify the types of arteries, and correlate the structure of the arteries with their function. List the anatomical components of microcirculation and the types of capillaries, and correlate their structure with their function. Discuss the reservoir function of veins and correlate their structure with their function. List and compare the four fabrics comprising the blood vessel walls. List, locate, and compare the primary coats or layers of tissue found in major arteries. All right, so our first objective here is to discuss blood vessel types. All right, so the first term that we see right here is angiogenesis. All right, angiogenesis is a big word, but it simply means the formation of new blood vessels. So this process starts when a baby is developing in their mother's womb, and of course it continues throughout our lifespan. So our bodies are constantly creating new blood vessels to repair damaged ones, also to help with growth, and even respond with exercise. So an example is if you are, I would say, a runner, you run a lot, your body may need to grow new blood vessels in order to deliver more oxygen to your muscles. So again, that process of forming new blood vessels is angiogenesis. All right, next we have three main types of vessels in our body, and those are arteries, capillaries, and also veins. All right, arteries are kind of like highways. They carry oxygen-rich blood away from the heart to the rest of their body, to the rest of our body. They have thick, strong walls because they have to handle a lot of pressure from the heart pumping that blood out of the ventricle. So a major artery that you may have heard of is the aorta. That's the largest artery in our body. You can feel our arteries working if you were to check your pulse. All right, if you check your pulse on your wrist or on your neck, you're feeling the blood flow pulsate through an artery. All right, the next vessel is capillaries. So capillaries, they're considered to be the tiniest of the blood vessels. So they're so small that red blood cells, they have to pass through, I would say in single file. That's how small they are. So they connect arteries and veins. So they act basically as a delivery system for our oxygen and nutrients to the body, and also to the cells. And they also pick up waste products like carbon dioxide so that the body can remove them. So again, think of capillaries like delivery drivers bringing goods, such as that's the nutrients in the oxygen, and they're of course taking out the trash, and that trash would be the carbon dioxide. All right, the last one is the veins. So the veins, once that blood has been dropped off and the oxygen is delivered and the waste is picked up, the veins will carry the blood back to the heart. So unlike the arteries, veins have thinner walls and they contain valves to keep the blood flowing in the right direction. So these valves basically prevent that blood from flowing backward. So it's like a one-way street. Um, we need it to go back to the heart so that it can get more oxygen. All right, so we mentioned that arteries' job is to carry blood away from the heart. So again, think of arteries like highways that transport blood away from the heart to the different parts of the body that need it. So most arteries carry oxygen-rich blood, which gives them a bright red color. One exception is the pulmonary artery. That one carries oxygen-poor blood from the heart to the lungs in order to pick up more oxygen. So think of the arteries like delivery trucks carrying fresh supplies, which is oxygen and nutrients to our body cells. All right, our second bullet point right there, elastic conducting arteries. and the largest one in the body. So the largest artery in the body, or the larger arteries in the body, are called elastic arteries. And they're called that because they can stretch and kind of recoil like a rubber band, if you've ever played with rubber bands. So they need to be this way in order to handle the high pressure from the heart pumping that blood. So some examples: the aorta is of course the biggest artery in the body, and it comes straight out of the heart. It branches out into smaller arteries that of course carry blood to our brain, our arms, our legs, and other organs. All right, in terms of the arteries being able to stretch without injury, since the heart pumps blood with such great force, elastic arteries need to be able to expand when the blood rushes in and also shrink back when the heart relaxes. So if they were stiff, they could potentially break under pressure. So their flexibility is needed in order to keep them from being damaged. All right, last but not least, that last bullet point: accommodate a surge of blood when the heart contracts and recoils, when the ventricles relax. So basically, each time our heart beats, it sends out a powerful surge of blood. So those elastic arteries are able to expand in order to absorb that pressure and force from the blood being pumped out, and they're able to snap back when the heart, of course, relaxes. So this helps keep the blood flowing smoothly instead of, a sudden burst. So again, if you've ever felt your pulse on your wrist or your neck, that's basically your artery stretching and recoiling as your heart beats. All right, so here we are looking at a microscopic view of an artery and also a vein. All right, so both arteries and veins, they're blood vessels, but of course they have different structures and of course different functions in terms of the circulatory system. So the artery, if you're looking at it, it's larger, it's rounder and thicker. It's a thicker walled structure. The thick walls are necessary because, again, arteries carry blood away from the heart and they're under a great amount of pressure as that heart is beating. So arteries need to be strong. We already learned that they have elastic walls in order to handle the force of that heart pumping. The innermost layer of the artery, which is the endothelium, it's smooth and it allows that blood to flow efficiently. So you can think of arteries like, I would say, strong water pipes that can handle high pressure as that blood is flowing through. Also, I do want you to take note of the actual perimeter of the artery and the vein. If you look at the artery, you can see that the walls, the muscular walls, are a lot thicker than the vein. So the vein, if you're looking at it in terms of the wall itself, is thinner. It's more irregular shape compared to the artery, and their job, of course, is to carry blood back to the heart. But the blood is now under low pressure. It doesn't have that force of the ventricles pushing it out. So since it's not being pumped out forcefully, the walls don't need to be as thick. But since they don't have the thick walls, they rely on valves inside of them to keep that blood moving in the direction back to the heart. So those valves prevent the blood from backflowing. So veins are kind of like one-way streets that guide the blood back to the heart without letting it flow backwards. So in terms of their differences, they are different because arteries are considered much stronger, and again they have that thicker wall in order to handle that high blood pressure. Veins, of course, are thinner, and they use valves and surrounding muscles in order to push the blood back to the heart. If veins weren't structured that way, blood could potentially pool in the lower body and lead to conditions like varicose veins. So again, this is just a microscopic view to help us see how arteries and veins look up close and kind of discuss why they're different. So even though both carry blood, their direction, the pressure, and some other structures that they rely on make them unique. Now we're looking at some types of arteries. So the first one is the muscular, also known as distributing arteries. So muscular arteries are smaller than the elastic arteries that we talked about in the previous slide, but they still play a major important role in our circulatory system. The distributing arteries, their main job is just to do that, distribute blood to the specific organs and also different body parts. So they have a thick muscular layer, and that allows them to control that blood flow by constricting and also dilating. So some examples of muscular arteries are our brachial arteries, which are the arteries that supply blood to our arms, gastric arteries, which are the arteries that supply blood to our stomach, and also superior mesenteric arteries, which are the arteries that supply blood to our intestines. All right, the next type of artery is the arteriole, which is also known as a resistance vessel. So arterioles are the smallest type of arteries, and they act more like a gateway between larger arteries and capillaries. So they're sometimes called resistance vessels because they play a role in regulating blood pressure and also blood flow to organs. So they narrow and they widen to help control how much blood is able to reach that different part of the body that demands it. So if the body needs more blood in a certain area, like muscles when we're exercising, the arterioles are going to dilate, which is basically open up. If they need less blood, then of course those arterioles, they're going to constrict, which is close down and allow less blood to flow. All right, and the last point right here is the meta-arterioles, and these are considered to be short vessels that connect arterioles to capillaries. So they are basically surrounded by what we call precapillary sphincters, which are tiny muscles that control how much blood can enter the capillary. So think of these precapillary sphincters like little doors that open and close to regulate how much blood can flow into the capillary. So at the end of each meta-arteriole, there's what we call thoroughfare channels, and that, of course, allows blood to bypass capillaries if they need to. All right, so basically understanding these smaller arteries help us see how blood is controlled and regulated as our body moves or as it moves throughout our body. So without arterioles and also without these meta-arterioles, our body wouldn't be able to adjust the blood flow based on the needs and demands of the body. So like sending more blood to the brain when studying, to the skin when sweating. So again, that's how it regulates the blood flow. All right, and again, the system also helps keep blood pressure stable and ensures that all the parts of our body get the oxygen and nutrients that it needs. So again, muscular arteries distribute blood to organs, arterioles regulate blood flow and blood pressure, and meta-arterioles help transition blood from arterioles to capillaries. All right, and all together, of course, they work in order to ensure that we get the oxygen and nutrients that we need throughout the body. Now we're looking at the capillaries. The capillaries are the smallest blood vessels in the body. They're so tiny that they say that red blood cells have to pass through in single file in these. That's how tiny they are. So they connect the smallest arteries, which are the arterioles, to the smallest veins, which are the venules. Um, and because of their thin walls, they allow nutrients, oxygen, and also waste products to easily pass between blood and our body cells. So think of capillaries like tiny bridges that connect the different parts of our circulatory system. All right, so in terms of carrying blood from arterioles to venules, we call that microcirculation. So the network of arterioles, capillaries, and also venules together, they're called microcirculation because it deals with the smallest blood vessels. And again, this system is very much essential for delivering oxygen and also nutrients while also removing waste. And actual waste is carbon dioxide. So basically, capillaries are like little doorways where exchange of those materials happen between blood and the body tissues. They are not evenly distributed, so capillaries are not found in equal amounts everywhere in the body. Some tissues need more capillaries than others. So areas where we have high metabolic rate, like where there's a lot of energy being used, have more capillaries. So like muscles and also the brain and also the heart. So some parts of the body like cartilage have very few to no capillaries at all. So these areas are called avascular tissues, meaning they rely on nearby tissues to receive nutrients. So without capillaries, oxygen and nutrients wouldn't reach all of our cells, and waste wouldn't be removed properly either. So they do help keep every part of the body alive and functioning as well. All right. So long story short, capillaries are the smallest blood vessels. They allow for that exchange of oxygen, nutrients, and also waste. They're part of the microcirculation system, connecting those arterioles and also the venules. And also some parts of the body have more capillaries than others, depending on how much oxygen and nutrients are needed at that part. So we just talked about microcirculation, and again, it's talking about how blood flows through those smallest blood vessels, including the arterioles, the capillaries, and also the venules. And we already know that it plays an important part in delivering oxygen and nutrients, as well as removing waste products from our tissue. So this diagram is basically showing us the two different pathways that blood can take through the microcirculation system. So the diagram on the left, which is diagram A, is showing normal blood flow through the capillary bed. So the arteriole is going to bring oxygen-rich blood from the heart. It's going to enter a meta-arteriole, which is, again, that small vessel that connects arterioles to capillaries. And then it is going to encounter the precapillary sphincter. So these are like tiny muscular valves. They're relaxed and they're going to allow that blood to flow into the true capillaries, which form the capillary bed. And this is where gas exchange is going to happen. So oxygen and nutrients is going to leave the blood and enter the tissues, and waste like carbon dioxide is going to be removed and move into the blood. So again, then that blood is going to travel through the through-fare channel that you see, and it's going to enter a venule, and of course it's going to return to the heart. Now the diagram on the right shows that the bypassing of the capillary bed. So sometimes those precapillary sphincters can contract, blocking that flow of blood into that capillary bed. So instead of going through the true capillaries, blood can just move directly through that through-fare channel to the venules. So this happens in cases where the body needs to redirect blood flow, such as when we're exercising, when we're under stress, when our body's trying to regulate temperature. So when we're cold, blood can bypass the capillaries to get to the skin in order to preserve our body heat. So microcirculation, it is important. It ensures that the right amount of oxygen and nutrients is going to reach our tissues at the right time. So it also adjusts blood flow depending on what the body needs at that moment. So again, when we're exercising versus when we're resting, or when we're exposed to extreme body temperatures, it can regulate that blood flow. If microcirculation doesn't work properly, of course our tissues can be damaged and die due to a lack of oxygen. So basically the key takeaway here is that microcirculation is the smallest, I would say the smallest level of blood flow in the body. In terms of those precapillary sphincters that you see here, they basically are sphincters that control whether blood can enter the capillary bed or whether it's going to bypass it. So again, um, this system basically is regulating our blood supply to the tissues based on the body's needs. All right, now let's look at the types of capillaries. So the first one is the true capillary. So true capillaries are basically the main sites of exchange between blood and tissue. So they receive the blood from that meta-arteriole that we talked about, but of course this flow is regulated by those precapillary sphincters. Those sphincters act like, I'll say, traffic signals deciding when blood can enter that capillary network. So if the body needs more oxygen in an area, the sphincters are going to relax and allow that blood to flow into the capillaries. If not, they're going to contract and redirect that blood to another location that might need it. So there's three types of capillaries, and not all of them are the same. So the body has, again, three main types of capillaries, and each has a different function. So we have continuous capillaries. That's the most common type. And continuous capillaries are found in muscles, the lungs, and also connective tissue. And then we also have fenestrated capillaries. These are capillaries that have small holes in them, and those holes, we call them fenestrations. And that allows for a faster exchange of fluids and also small molecules. Those types of capillaries are found in the kidneys and also in the intestines. And we also have these sinusoids or discontinuous capillaries, and those capillaries have large gaps between the cells, and they allow bigger molecules like proteins to pass through. And those types are found in the spleen, the liver, and also in the bone marrow. All right, continuous capillaries. Um, they have tight, a tight, unbroken lining of endothelial cells, and that makes them less permeable than those other types. So they do allow for controlled exchange of nutrients, gas, and also waste through those small gaps called intercellular clefts. Because they provide a more regulated flow, they're found in places like skeletal muscles and the lungs, where we need precise control over what enters and what exits the blood when it's needed. So to wrap this slide up, true capillaries are controlled by those precapillary sphincters. We have three types of capillaries that exist, and each have, of course, a different function. The continuous capillaries, which are the most common, are found in the muscles, the lungs, and also connective tissues. All right, so we talked about the three types of capillaries. Now this is a visual of the three different types. So again, not all capillaries are the same. Different tissues in the body require different levels of exchange between the blood and those surrounding cells. So again, this slide just shows us the three types of capillaries. So the first picture, which is picture A, is showing us continuous capillaries. Picture B is showing us fenestrated capillaries, and picture C is showing us the sinusoids, or those discontinuous capillaries. So when we look at picture A, again, that's the most common type of capillary, the continuous. This type is found in places like our muscles, the skin, our lungs, and also the central nervous system. It has a continuous lining of endothelial cells, which creates what we consider a tight barrier with only small gaps or intercellular clefts between those adjacent cells. So these small gaps is what allows a limited exchange of that nutrients, gas, and also waste, and prevents large molecules from passing through. So this type of capillary is going to help maintain the blood-brain barrier, which protects the brain from harmful substances that might be in our bloodstream. So if we think of this type, we can think of it kind of like a coffee filter. So only small molecules can pass through, and larger ones are going to stay inside of the filter. All right, picture B is showing us fenestrated capillaries. So this is found in tissues that need a more rapid exchange of substances, like our kidneys, the intestines, and also our endocrine glands. So these capillaries have, if you're looking at it, they have tiny holes or fenestrations, or you can even call them pores in the walls, and it allows for a faster movement of fluids and also small molecules. So despite it having pores, there's still a basement membrane there that provides a little bit more control over what can pass through. All right, so let's look at this one. So the first one, we said it was like a coffee strainer. This is more like a regular strainer or coffee filter versus like a regular strainer. So it does allow some small molecules like water to pass through, but it's going to keep those larger particles inside. And then the last one in figure C, this is the most porous type, the discontinuous or the sinusoids, most porous type of capillary, and it's found in organs like our liver, the spleen, and also bone marrow, where large substances like proteins and blood cells need to pass through between the blood and the surrounding tissue. So these capillaries, if you're looking at it, it has huge gaps between those endothelial cells, and it has what we consider an incomplete or an absent basement membrane, allowing for more free exchange of large molecules, and even whole cells can move through. So it's important for filtering out old blood cells in the spleen, and also allowing newly made blood cells to enter circulation in the bone marrow. So again, if we're given an analogy, um, the continuous would be like a coffee filter. Fenestrated would be like a strainer in your home. And this one would be more like a net, with big holes in it. And again, it allows those larger molecules to pass through more freely. So again, the reason why these different types of capillaries matter is because different organs have different require different types of capillary structures in order for them to function properly. So the continuous capillaries protect the more sensitive areas like our brain and muscles. The fenestrated capillaries are going to allow rapid absorption in places like the kidneys and the intestines, and those sinusoids are going to permit larger molecules to exchange when it's filtering. And it also allows those blood cells to move through as necessary. All right, so that is it for this slide. All right, we kind of already discussed this, but since it's up here, let's just discuss it again. Um, this one's more focused on just the fenestrated and also the discontinuous capillaries, or the sinusoids. So again, in terms of the fenestrated capillaries, they have both intercellular clefts and also the small holes or fenestrations in there endothelial lining. And again, those fenestrations are going to allow for a more rapid exchange of fluids and also small molecules, while still preventing those larger substances from passing through. So we kind of a visual, we call this like a strainer in our home. So these are commonly found in organs that need to absorb or filter out a lot more substances, like the kidneys when they're filtering blood and forming urine, the small intestines absorbing nutrients from food, and also the endocrine glands when they're allowing hormones to enter the bloodstream quickly. So again, this is the fenestrated type. Next is the discontinuous capillaries, or the sinusoids. Again, it has much larger openings. We compared it to a net. Again, these openings compared to other types of capillaries are a lot larger. In terms of their basement membrane, it's incomplete or entirely absent. making it a lot more porous than the other two types of capillaries. So because of these big gaps, it's going to allow for more movement of those larger molecules and even some cells into and out of our bloodstream. So organs that contain this type of capillary are going to be the liver. Of course, it needs to filter out toxins and also process nutrients. The spleen, it's going to be recycling those old red blood cells, and then also the bone marrow, allowing for those new blood cells to enter circulation. So again, we would more so compare this one like a net. So again, the different organs are going to require different types of capillaries based on their function. So the fenestrated capillaries are great for that rapid exchange that would be required by kidneys and intestines. And of course, the sinusoids are going to allow those molecules and cells to move more freely when they're needed in things like blood cell production and also filtration of the liver, the spleen, and also the bone marrow. All right, now let's talk about our veins. So the veins are the blood vessels that are responsible for carrying blood back to the heart after it's delivered oxygen to the body. So unlike the arteries that carry blood away from the heart, the veins are going to be returning that blood back to the heart so that it can be refreshed or get reoxygenated. So the pressure in the veins is a lot lower or much lower than the arteries. So they have special structures in order for them to help keep the blood moving through efficiently. All right, so veins act like collectors. They're gathering blood from smaller vessels, and those smaller vessels are the venules. All right, so they're also known as capacitant vessels, meaning they can hold a large volume of blood and act like a storage system for us. So at any given time, about 60 to 70% of our body's blood is in a vein. So this ability to store that blood helps regulate not only our blood pressure, but also circulation. So think of our veins like a reservoir tank that can expand and contract depending on the body's needs. All right, veins contain one-way valve. So since blood in the veins is moving against gravity, meaning like some of it, especially in our legs, it's moving back up to the heart, veins have a one-way valve. And that valve helps prevent that blood from flowing backwards. So these valves are similar to the semilunar valves that we learned about in the heart. So if these valves weaken or if they fail, blood can pool in the veins, and it leads to a condition called varicose veins. So I would say if you're thinking about a vein, think of it like an escalator. Those valves ensure that that blood keeps moving in one direction, which is upward towards our heart. All right, the venous system itself includes three main structures, and those are the venules, the veins, and also the venous sinuses. So the venules, they're the smallest veins that collect blood from capillaries. Veins, of course, are the larger vessels that carry blood towards the heart, and then venous sinuses, they're special large thin wall veins that store blood in areas like the brain, which they call them the dural sinuses, and also the heart. We learned that the heart has a coronary sinus. So without veins, blood wouldn't be able to return to the heart and lungs to pick up more oxygen that we need in our cells. So their ability to store that blood and regulate circulation helps our body stay balanced. So that one-way valve that veins have prevents that backflow of blood, all right, and ensures that the blood is going to reach the heart. All right, next we're going to talk about collagen fibers. So collagen fibers are structural proteins, and they're found in the walls of the blood vessels as well. Their main job is basically to provide strength and also support to keep those blood vessels intact when they're under pressure. So without collagen, blood vessels would be weak and they will also be prone to damage. In terms of their appearance, they're considered to have a woven appearance. So collagen fibers have a woven or rope-like appearance similar to a braided rope. So their structure makes them not only strong but also resistant to tearing. They're formed from protein molecules that basically combine or aggregate into fibers, creating that durable support system for the blood vessels. All right, collagen fibers are visible under the microscope, and that makes them easier to study when we're talking about tissue samples. So unlike elastic fibers, collagen has a very limited ability to stretch, so only about 2 to 3% under normal conditions. So this makes them ideal for reinforcement rather than for flexibility. So one of the most important functions of the collagen fibers is to help strengthen the walls of the blood vessel. So they help keep the lumen or the inner space of that blood vessel open, preventing it from collapsing under pressure. So it's really important in our arteries, which experience that high pressure from that blood being pumped from the heart. So think of collagen fibers kind of like reinforcing strands inside of, if you've ever seen the inside of a tire or you've ever seen the inside of a hose, think of collagen fibers like that. They prevent the material from breaking or collapsing while still allowing for some flexibility. So just like a tire holds air under pressure, collagen helps our blood vessels hold their shape and function properly. So again, key takeaways for collagen fibers is they reinforce blood vessels and keep them strong. They have very little stretch, so they're not like those elastic fibers, and they have a woven structure, so essential for our vascular stability. All right, the next fabric is the elastic fibers. So elastic fibers are specialized connective tissue components that provide the vessels with flexibility and also resilience. So they're made of what we call elastin, which is an insoluble protein that allows the tissues to stretch and return to their normal or original shape, kind of like a rubber band. All right, so these fibers are really important for our large arteries because they experience a lot of high pressure changes with each heartbeat. So elastic fibers, they're highly elastic networks that help that blood vessel expand and also recoil as that blood is moving through them. The fibers have a wavy appearance and they can stretch more than 100 times under normal physiological conditions. So the elasticity is going to prevent those blood vessels from becoming too stiff or too fragile and allow them to withstand that pulsating blood flow from the heart. Elastic fibers, they do play a critical role in creating what we call passive tension. So it basically helps blood vessels maintain that consistent pressure throughout that cardiac cycle. So when the heart pumps blood, the arteries expand due to this elastic fiber. When the heart relaxes, those elastic fibers are allowed to recoil, pushing blood forward and maintaining circulation between those heartbeats. So again, it prevents sudden drops in our blood pressure and it helps blood flow smoothly. All right. In large elastic fibers like those in the aorta, the fibers are arranged in a more concentric circular type pattern, and this allows the aorta to stretch and also contract efficiently to handle that blood pressure without being damaged. So without this elastic fiber, arteries would become rigid and prone to rupture. with that increased pressure. So I think of these elastic fibers like rubber bands. They stretch when they're pulled and they return to their normal shape when they're released. All right, and this stretch and recoil ability is what keeps the blood flowing steadily and even when the heart is actively pumping. All right, the last fiber that we're going to talk about is the smooth muscle tissue. All right, and smooth muscle tissue is found in the walls of blood vessels and also hollow organs like our stomach and also the intestines. So it's basically an involuntary muscle, so that means that we don't have to think about making it work. It contracts automatically. In the vascular system, smooth muscles control blood vessel diameter, and they also affect blood pressure, and they also affect circulation. So smooth muscle is present in almost all of the blood vessels except for our capillaries. Capillaries are too thin to contain muscle, so instead they just rely on precapillary sphincters to help regulate that blood flow. So the most abundant area of smooth muscle in our circulatory system are in elastic and also muscular arteries, where they play a major role in regulating our blood pressure. Smooth muscle fibers, they can contract and they can also relax, allowing the blood vessels to either narrow, and that term is called vasoconstriction, and they can also widen, and that term is called vasodilation. All right, so again, vasoconstriction, the muscle contracts, making that blood vessel narrow. If the blood vessel, the muscle contracts, making the blood vessel, narrower, which increases our blood pressure if that happens. And this basically happens when our body needs to preserve things such as heat. It can also happen during stress when we're talking about our fight or flight response. All right, in terms of vasodilation, the muscles relax, making the blood vessels wider, which lowers the blood pressure, and that will increase the blood flow. So this happens during times like if we're exercising or when our body needs to cool down. So think of smooth muscle and blood vessels like I'll say like a nozzle on a garden hose. If you tighten that nozzle or cause it to vasoconstrict, the water sprays out faster with more force. So we have that higher blood pressure there. If we loosen that nozzle in terms of vasodilation, it allows that water to flow more freely and with less force. So that is lowering our blood vessels. So the ability to adjust the blood vessel diameter is what helps control the blood pressure and ensure that we have proper circulation. So key takeaways as far as smooth muscle goes is it's involuntary, again found in all of our blood vessels except for capillaries. Found in blood vessels except for capillaries. It controls our blood flow, and it does that by adjusting the vessel diameter. In terms of vasoconstriction, that means that it's increasing the the blood pressure, while vasodilation decreases the blood pressure. All right, now we're moving on to list, locate, and compare the primary coats or layers of tissue found in major arteries and veins. So blood vessels have three main layers, also known as tunics. So the layers that we're talking about, they provide not only structure but also strength and function, and they allow those vessels to expand, contract, and of course transport blood efficiently. So not all blood vessels have all three layers. Remember, capillaries only have one layer to allow for easy exchange of material. So the first one that is listed here is tunica externa, also known as tunica adventitia. All right, the outermost layer of blood vessels are made up of this type of connective tissue, and it provides not only strength but also flexibility. So it's found in arteries and veins. but it's thicker in veins to help anchor them in place. It does contain collagen, and it also contains that elastic fiber that we talked about, and this prevents those blood vessels from overstretching and also collapsing. So again, think of it like the outer coating of a garden hose. It's a layer that protects the inner layers and keeps it more durable. All right, now we're going to move into the middle layer, which is tunica media. All right, so the middle layer of the blood vessels is made up mostly of the smooth muscle that we talked about. So it's found in arteries and veins, but it's much thicker in arteries because they need not only to be able, they need to be able to withstand that high pressure from the heart. So this layer basically controls that vasoconstriction, which is the narrowing, and also that vasodilation, which is the widening, so that we can regulate blood flow and also pressure. So um, when when you're cold, our arteries constrict to reduce that blood flow to the skin and help keep us warm. All right, the last one is tunica intima. All right, tunica intima. All right, so tunica intima is the innermost layer of the blood vessel. So it's present in all the blood vessels, and it's made of what we call simple squamous epithelium or endothelium. All right, and it provides that smooth surface that helps reduce that friction as the blood is flowing through. So this is the only layer that's found in the capillaries, allowing for that fast exchange of oxygen, nutrients, and also waste. So think of it like a non-stick coating, um, a non-stick coating. And again, it's going to prevent that friction and also keep that blood moving. So as the blood vessels get smaller, their walls get thinner, and that allows for an easier exchange of material. So arteries have a thicker tunica media to handle that high pressure. Veins have a thicker tunica externa for support, since they carry blood under lower pressure. And of course, capillaries only have the tunica intima for that efficient diffusion of gases and nutrients. So um, that is it for this slide. All right, now we're going to look at a few more learning objectives that we need to go over. Um, those objectives are: trace blood flow from the heart to various locations in the body and return the blood to the heart. Locate the major systemic arteries and identify the regions of the body they supply. Identify the major systemic veins, the regions of the blood they supply, and the unusual anatomical characteristics of the hepatic portal circulation. And then list and discuss the functions of the 6 structures characteristic of the fetal circulation. Discuss changes that occur in the vascular system at birth, and also discuss disorders of blood vessels. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is circulatory routes. So the circulatory system has 2 major pathways. All right, one is the systemic circulation that delivers oxygenated blood to the body, and the other one is the pulmonary circulation, which carries deoxygenated blood to the lungs for to get more oxygen. So together, the routes ensure that all body tissues are going to receive oxygen and also nutrients while removing that CO2 and waste. So going a little bit deeper into the systemic circulation. So basically, in terms of the pathway, the blood flows from the left ventricle of the heart through the arteries to all of our body tissues, and it returns to the right atrium. So again, this route supplies oxygenated blood to every organ except for the lungs. It's a high pressure system because that blood has to travel long distances. So arteries carry that oxygen rich blood and veins return that oxygen poor blood back to the heart. In terms of pulmonary circulation, basically when we're talking about this pathway, deoxygenated blood is going to enter the right atrium. It's going to flow into the right ventricle. The right ventricle is going to pump that blood into the pulmonary artery, which takes it to the lungs. So in the lungs, capillaries, basically in the lungs, capillaries, oxygen is picked up, and that is where carbon dioxide is released. So this is what the capillaries in the lungs do. So the now oxygen rich blood returns to the left atrium through the pulmonary veins. From the left atrium, it then is going to move to the left ventricle to be pumped back into the systemic circulation. So basically, the pulmonary artery here, when we're talking about the pulmonary artery, it's the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood, and the pulmonary veins are the only veins that carry oxygenated blood. So the importance of the circulatory route is basically the heart functions as a dual pump. The right side handles pulmonary circulation or low pressure, and the left side handles systemic circulation, which is high pressure. So the brain's muscles and also organs rely on continuous blood flow, so that this circulation is essential for us to survive. If there are disruptions in the circulation, it can cause us to have serious conditions like stroke, heart attacks, and also organ failure. So that is pretty much it for this slide. Key takeaways here is our systemic circulation basically supplies blood to the body, and the pulmonary circulation oxygenates blood in the lungs. So we're looking at the heart as a dual pump working to keep the blood flowing efficiently. So we just talked about pulmonary and systemic circulation. So here's our visual of those routes. So the pulmonary circulation again is responsible for that gas exchange in the lungs, and the systemic circulation is going to supply that oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. So these two pathways basically work together to keep oxygen moving through the body, and also in order to remove that carbon dioxide. So if we look at the pulmonary circulation, again, it carries the oxygenated blood to the lungs and brings oxygenated blood back to the heart. So the blood enters, again, if we are tracing the blood flow, is going to enter the right atrium from the body via the superior and the inferior vena cava. Is then going to move into the right ventricle and pump blood through the pulmonary arteries to the lungs. All right, in the lungs, the capillaries, basically carbon dioxide is going to be exchanged for oxygen there. So that oxygenated blood is now going to return to the left atrium via the pulmonary vein. So again, the key thing here is those pulmonary arteries are carrying deoxygenated blood. The pulmonary veins are carrying oxygenated blood. So this is opposite of what happens in the systemic circulation system. All right, if we're looking at the systemic circulation side, again, it's delivering oxygen-rich blood to the bodies, the organs, and also the tissues. As far as its pathway, the blood is going to move from the left atrium to the left ventricle. The left ventricle is going to pump that oxygenated blood through the aorta. All right, that blood is going to travel through the arteries, the arterioles, and also the capillaries to deliver that oxygen and also nutrients to our body tissues. And then deoxygenated blood is going to return to the right atrium via the veins and the vena cava to complete the cycle. So the left ventricle has a much thicker wall than the right ventricle because it needs to generate more force to pump that blood throughout the entire body. So basically, the pulmonary circulation oxygenates the blood while the systemic circulation delivers oxygen to tissues. Both systems are working together simultaneously to keep the body functioning, and any disruption such as a blood clot in the lungs, which we call a pulmonary embolism, or heart failure can cause serious health complications to us. So if we're looking for a visual, think of the pulmonary circulation like a gas station. Blood stops at the lungs, we fill up with oxygen, and then the systemic circulation is like a delivery truck. It takes the oxygen from the lungs and delivers it to every cell in the body. So key takeaways: pulmonary circulation exchanges gases in the lungs, and systemic circulation supplies oxygen to the body and removes waste. All right, here is our introduction to systemic arteries. So systemic arteries are basically responsible for carrying oxygen rich blood from the heart to the entire body. So the main arteries basically branch off into smaller arteries, eventually leading to arterioles and also capillaries, where oxygen and nutrients are going to be exchanged with the tissue. So these branching pathways are going to ensure that every organ and also tissue receives adequate blood supply. So arteries start large, like the aorta, and they progressively divide into smaller branches. So those branches become arterioles, which are the smallest arteries, leading into capillaries. So the goal is to distribute oxygen efficiently throughout the body while also regulating blood flow. So think of the arterial system like a tree. The trunk is an aorta, which splits into branches. Those branches are the arteries, and it further splits into like twigs, and twigs would be considered to be the arterioles before reaching leaves, and the leaves would be like capillaries. All right, so the next one is end arteries, and end arteries that basically they are arteries that do not have an alternate pathway. So they deliver blood to a specific area and they eventually terminate in capillaries. So this means if an end artery is blocked, then the area it supplies is going to lose blood flow, which can lead to tissue damage and also death. So the coronary artery, which supplies the heart, it's considered an end artery. So a blockage can cause a heart attack, myocardial infarction, which is what we're talking about. All right, the next thing we're going to look at is anastomosis. Anastomosis is when two or more arteries connect and provide an alternate route for blood to flow. So these are especially important in places like our joints and also critical organs. So where movement or blockages could otherwise cut off circulation. So an example of one of these is the circle of Willis in our brain. It ensures that if one artery is blocked, then there's other arteries that can still supply blood to the brain. So the farther an artery is from the heart, the more likely it is to have an anastomosis for backup circulation. So in terms of the shunt piece, there are direct connections between arteries and veins, bypassing capillaries. So this allows for quick regulation of blood flow, especially in terms of temperature control. So in cold weather, arteriovenous anastomosis in the skin diverts blood away from the extremities to conserve heat. So think of a shunt as like a shortcut. So instead of taking all of the small roads, which are the capillaries, blood takes a direct more direct routes, which they take the highway from the artery to the vein. All right, so why this matters is because it helps if we're trying to treat some type of circulatory disorder. It helps us to understand the arterial structure. So, again, blockages in arteries can cause a stroke or a heart attack. So, as a surgeon, surgeons use arterial anastomosis during bypass surgeries in order to restore blood flow. So again, in terms of what a shunt is, shunts help regulate blood flow and also prevent things such as overheating and also overcooling. So key takeaways here are arteries. They branch into arterioles and also capillaries to help distribute blood. End arteries have no backup. So if they're blocked, they can cause serious damage. We'd be in serious trouble. Arterial anastomosis provides alternate circulation routes, and shunts bypass capillaries, so they quickly adjust blood flow for us. All right, this slide is just showing us principal arteries of the body. So we already know that arteries, they're the blood vessels that are responsible for carrying that oxygenated blood away from the heart to the rest of the body. So the diagram here basically highlights the major or principal arteries that supply blood to our vital organs and also tissue. So knowing these arteries is important to be able to understand circulation, to understand things such as pulse points, and also to be able to understand medical conditions like strokes and also heart attacks. So some of the major arteries that are listed here in terms of the head and the neck, we have the common carotid arteries, the right and left. They supply blood to the brain, also the face, and also the scalp. We have internal carotid arteries. They're like the major supplier of blood to the brain. And then we have the external carotid arteries. They supply blood to the face, the scalp, and also the neck. Also, we have vertebral arteries, all right, and vertebral arteries, they travel through the spinal column, and of course, they're going to supply blood to the brain stem and also the posterior brain. So, blockages in our carotid arteries can cause a person to have a stroke due to that reduced blood flow in the brain. All right, in terms of the upper body, the major arteries of the upper body are the subclavian arteries. They supply blood to the arms, the chest, and also the shoulders. We also have the brachial arteries, which run down our upper arm, and it's commonly used for blood pressure measurements, basically. We also have a radial artery and also an ulnar artery, and that supplies blood to the forearms and also the hands. The radial artery is where we commonly check pulse at the wrist. All right, in terms of the lower body, some of the major arteries here are going to be the aorta. Of course, we already know that that's the largest artery in the body, but it carries blood from the heart to the entire body. Renal arteries, they supply blood to our kidneys, of course, which filter the waste for our body. We have the femoral arteries there. They supply the thigh and also the lower leg with blood, oxygenated blood. This is a place, a femoral artery, we can use that in an emergency to check a pulse point. Popliteal artery, that's found behind the knee, critical for circulation in our legs. And then we have the dorsalis pedis artery. That one is located on the top of the foot. We can use that one to check proper blood flow in the feet. And in terms of clinical connection, poor circulation in a leg artery can lead to something like peripheral artery disease. So that's where that patient would have pain and numbness. All right, there. All right, so that is pretty much it for this particular slide, it's just giving you a visual of all of the arteries in the body. It also, knowing where some of these are going to be important for you as nurses, because it's a place where you can check the person's pulse on a daily basis or in an emergency as well. Now we're looking at divisions and branches of the aorta. So the aorta is the largest artery in the body. It's like the main highway for oxygen-rich blood to leave the heart. So it originates from the left ventricle and it branches off into smaller arteries that supply our body. So the aorta is divided into different sections and each gives rise to a specific artery. So the aorta has four major sections. That's the ascending artery, the aortic arch, the thoracic aorta, and also the abdominal aorta. And if you look at these, they are bolded in bold print. So those are the only ones that are bolded. So as I'm talking, you could just look at this picture just to see which one I'm talking about. So in terms of the ascending aorta, it carries blood directly from the heart and it gives rise to our coronary artery. So it supplies the heart muscle. The aortic arch curves over the heart and it gives off three major branches, and those three major branches supply the head, the neck, and also the arms. All right, that's the aortic arch. And then we have the thoracic aorta. All right, it runs down the chest, thorax, and it supplies blood to the lungs, the esophagus, and also our chest wall. And then we have the abdominal aorta, which is the last bolded one, and it extends into the lower body and it supplies our digestive organs, our kidneys, and also our legs. So the branches of the aorta themselves, when we're talking about specifics, if we're looking at the brachiocephalic artery, all right, brachiocephalic artery, that artery supplies the right arm and also the right side of our head. All right, another one is the left common carotid artery. All right, the left common carotid artery supplies the left side of our head and also the brain. All right, and these again are the branches of the aorta is what we're looking at. And then the last one is the left subclavian artery. All right, so these are at the top. Let's see if I can write on this. So we're up here. All right, the left subclavian artery supplies the left arm and also the upper body. All right, now we're going to look at the branches of the thoracic artery. All right, so there's the thoracic artery there. And the thoracic artery has the intercostal arteries. All right, intercostal arteries. And the intercostal arteries, they supply blood to the ribs and also our chest muscles. All right, then we're going to look at the bronchial arteries. All right, the bronchial arteries, which are here. All right, bronchial arteries supply blood to the lungs. And then we have the esophageal arteries. All right, the esophageal arteries supply blood to the esophagus. All right, now we're going to look at the branches of the abdominal aorta, which is here. All right, and that one we have the celiac trunk. All right, and the celiac trunk supplies the stomach, the liver, and also the spleen. And then we have the superior mesenteric artery. All right, and the superior mesenteric artery supplies the small intestine and also part of the large intestine. And then we have the renal arteries. All right, and the renal arteries, of course, supply the kidneys. Then we have the inferior mesenteric artery, and that artery supplies the lower portion of the large intestine. And then we have the common iliac arteries. Common iliac arteries. Oh, here we go. All right, common iliac arteries. They basically divide into the femoral artery, and they supply the legs. All right, so now we can discuss visceral branches versus parietal branches. All right, so visceral branches, they basically supply organs like our stomach, our liver, and our kidneys. Parietal branches, they supply like the walls of the body, like our ribs and also the muscles. So these branches basically are going to help regulate blood flow to specific areas based on the body's needs. So in terms of clinical importance, um, knowing about the aorta, it can lead you to know what some conditions could occur as a result of blockages in the aorta, or a weakened area in the aorta, or even maybe the aorta is that blood supply is interrupted due to a tear, or maybe there's some sort of plaque buildup. So one thing that comes to mind is something like an aortic aneurysm. So basically, there's a weakened area in that aortic wall that ruptures, all right, and that can cause a life-threatening bleed if it's not caught pretty much immediately and immediate action is taken. Another one is atherosclerosis. So for that one, we have plaque buildup in the aorta, and that can, of course, restrict blood flow and can lead to things like heart attack and also stroke. And then another one is aortic dissection. So basically, there's a tear in the aortic wall, and that interrupts blood flow to our vital organs. So those are some conditions that involve the aorta. So knowing about it is pretty important. So it's basically, if analogy wise, the aorta is like a major highway, and it has many exit ramps or branches that lead to different areas of the body. So just like traffic has to be well regulated on the highway, traffic also has to be well regulated when it comes to blood flow. All right, we need to have efficient, uninterrupted blood flow in order for our body to function properly. All right, so key takeaway here, the aorta is, of course, the body's largest artery, and it carries blood from the heart throughout the body. It has four main divisions that supply blood to different regions. It has major branches that deliver oxygen-rich blood to organs and muscles and also limbs. All right, so understanding the aorta can help us diagnose serious cardiovascular diseases such as we just talked about. So now we're looking at major arteries of the head and neck. So arterial supply to the head and neck. All right, so the head and the neck require a rich blood supply in order to support our brain, the face, and some other vital structures. So these arteries do originate from the heart, and of course they branch out to deliver that oxygen and nutrients to the brain, the skin, the muscles, the glands, etc. So the slide that we're looking at now basically is highlighting the major arteries of the head and neck, including the common carotid artery and its branches as well. All right, so some of the key ones that we are going to point out here. The common carotid artery is basically in terms of that artery, the right common carotid artery arises from the brachiocephalic artery, all right, that we saw on the last slide. And while the left common carotid artery is going to arise directly from the aortic arch. All right, so both of them divide into main branches. All right, one has internal carotid artery, which supplies the blood to the brain. And then we also have the external carotid artery, which supplies the face, the jaw, the scalp, and also the skull. All right, so in terms of the internal carotid artery, it basically travels to the brain. And we're going to look at another slide, but it forms what we call a part of the circle of Willis, and that's a vital structure that helps ensure that we have a constant blood supply to the brain. All right, a blockage in the internal carotid artery can lead to a stroke due to having a reduced oxygen supply in the brain. All right, the external carotid artery and its branches, we have the facial artery. All right, and the facial artery supplies blood to the skin and also the muscles of the face. All right, the maxillary artery. All right, the maxillary artery supplies the deep structures of the face, including the jaw and also our teeth. And I'm sorry, I wasn't pointing out the arteries, but there's the maxillary artery. And then we have the occipital artery, all right, and that supplies the back of the scalp. And then we have the superficial temporal artery, and that supplies or feeds the scalp and also the forehead. And then we have the lingual artery, and the lingual artery provides blood to the tongue and also the floor of the mouth. All right, so vertebral arteries, they travel through the vertebrae. All right, and they basically merge to form what we call a basilar artery, which supplies the brainstem and also the cerebellum. So in terms of clinical importance, if we have a blockage, it could cause things such as vertigo, balance issues in the patient, and also strokes in the posterior brain region. So again, the brain requires about 20% of the body's oxygen. So a strong arterial supply is definitely necessary. Any damage or blockage in these arteries can lead to conditions like stroke due to the carotid artery being blocked. We can have TIAs or transient ischemic attacks. They're like mini strokes caused by reduced blood flow, and also aneurysms can occur as well if a weakened artery happens to burst. So again, we're talking about the arteries being like a complex highway system that allows blood to travel to and fro. So I'll wrap up. The common carotid artery is the main artery that's delivering blood to the head. The internal carotid artery supplies basically the brain, while the external carotid artery supplies the face and also the scalp. And then we have vertebral arteries that act kind of as an alternate route to ensure that we have continuous blood flow in that area. All right, so now we're looking at the arteries at the base of the brain. So basically this is the brain's blood supply. So the brain does require a constant and also a reliable supply of blood in order for it to function properly. So this slide does focus on the circle of Willis, but we are going to look at an MRI of the circle of Willis as well. And the circle of Willis is a network of arteries at the base of the brain that ensures that we have that continuous circulation of blood. So even if one artery is blocked, it has another pathway that it can take. So again, this is a great example of what we talked about earlier, that arterial anastomosis, which provides an alternate route for the blood to flow if one pathway is blocked. So basically, the circle of Willis is like an interconnected ring, so a circle of arteries, and again, they're going to supply the blood to the brain and also the surrounding structures. So it connects the internal carotid arteries, which are responsible for anterior circulation, and with the vertebral arteries, which is responsible for posterior circulation. So the major arteries that form the circle of Willis include the anterior cerebral arteries, which are here. All right, and they supply basically our frontal lobes. And then we have the middle cerebral arteries, which are over here, that supply the temporal and parietal lobes. And then we have the posterior cerebral arteries, which supply the occipital lobes and also the brainstem. We also have other communicating arteries, such as the anterior and posterior, and they connect major arteries to complete that circle of Willis that allow the alternate routes and that collateral circulation. So in terms of anastomosis, they are connections between the arteries that provide an alternate route, again, if one artery becomes blocked. So the circle of Willis basically ensures that if there's a blockage in one part of the brain, blood can still reach other areas, affected areas through other arteries. So this helps prevent things like strokes, or it reduces the severity of the stroke by attempting to maintain the blood flow even if one artery is damaged. So a clinical example is if the carotid artery is blocked, the posterior communicating artery can help supply blood to the affected area, and that's going to reduce the risk of that person having brain damage. So additional arteries are the basilar artery, which is here. And that artery is basically formed by merging of vertebral arteries, supplying the brainstem and also the cerebellum. Then we have the vertebral arteries, and those they basically again travel through that spinal column, and they supply blood to the posterior brain and also the brainstem. And then we have the superior and the inferior cerebellar arteries, and they supply the cerebellum. And the cerebellum basically controls our balance and also our circulation. All right, so clinical wise, why these are important is because if we have, a disruption of this blood flow, things such as CVAs or cerebrovascular attacks can occur, such as when we have a blood clot or a rupture that disrupts that brain circulation. Also, the TIAs or the transient ischemic attacks, temporary blockage that basically can warn of future stroke, so it's like a mini stroke. And then also aneurysms in that circle of Willis. So like in the anterior communicating artery, can rupture, causing a life-threatening bleed if it's not taken care of immediately or fast. So think of the circle of Willis again like a road system that has multiple routes, like so a city that has multiple bypasses. If one road is blocked, traffic, which we would say is blood, can just reroute through another pathway, and that will prevent a total shutdown. A total shutdown would be a stroke. So again, the circle of Willis just basically provides backup circulation to the brain. Arterial anastomosis basically is going to help prevent strokes by providing alternate routes or alternate routes for the blood to flow. But just know that disruptions in our brain circulation can lead to things such as strokes and aneurysms. All right, so this slide is basically just showing us the arteries that form the circle of Willis. All right, so the cerebral arterial circle. All right, and again, these arteries are responsible for delivering oxygen-rich blood to the brain, and we need for it to be, of course, delivering that blood so that the brain can function. So any blockage in these arteries can lead to conditions like stroke. So again, as you can see, the circle of Willis, there's a few arteries that are involved. We have the internal carotid artery, and the internal carotid artery basically they have a right and left one, and they basically are responsible for the anterior circulation. All right, anterior circulation. So they basically branch from the common carotid arteries, and they supply the front of the brain, including the frontal and also the parietal lobes. And they give rise to the anterior cerebral arteries. And those arteries basically supply blood to the medial portions of the frontal and also the parietal lobes. All right, and they also give rise to the middle cerebral arteries, which supply the lateral aspects of our brain, and including motor and also sensory areas. All right, then we have the vertebral arteries, and the vertebral arteries, which are down here. All right, the vertebral arteries, they branch from the subclavian arteries, as you can see here, the subclavian arteries, and they merge to form the basilar artery. All right, and the basilar artery supplies the brainstem and also the cerebellum, and it gives rise to the posterior cerebral artery, which supplies the occipital lobes. All right, basically controls our vision centers, and also the brain stem. Then we have the superior and inferior cerebellar arteries, and they supply, of course, the cerebellum, and that is responsible for our balance and also our coordination. All right, then some communicating arteries that we have are the anterior communicating artery, and that artery connects the right and left anterior cerebral arteries. And then we have the posterior communicating artery, and that connects the internal carotid arteries to the posterior cerebral arteries, right, linking that anterior and posterior circulation. All right, so the circle of Willis again acts kind of like a safety mechanism. If one artery is blocked, blood can still reach the brain via an alternate pathway. So again, the ability to reroute the blood flow is critical, especially if in a patient that might have had a stroke, and stroke of course can occur when a blood clot restricts the brain, the flow of blood to the brain. So again, this is just taking a deeper look at the circle of Willis. Blood still starts from the aortic arch, is carried upward through the common carotid arteries, which supply that anterior circulation, and then the vertebral arteries, which supply the posterior circulation. Then we have the internal carotid and the vertebral arteries. They join at the circle of Willis, and then blood is distributed to the different parts of the brain via the anterior, the middle, and the posterior cerebral arteries. All right, now we're looking at an MRI of the brain, and we're specifically looking at that circle of Willis that we've been talking about that's at the base of the brain. So this is basically called MRI angiography. So it's a non-invasive imaging technique that's used to look at blood vessels to detect not only abnormalities but also things like blockages, aneurysms, or any malformation. So here we're looking at the circle of Willis again. All right. So it's basically the redundant circulation for the brain in case of any sort of arterial blockages. So with this one, they've of course used a magnetic field in order to create this detailed image right here. So again, this is just us looking at the circle of Willis. So again, if there's a blockage in any other part of the any of these arteries, of course, it can be bypassed in order to get the blood to where it needs to go. So again, things such as this MRI can help us detect blockages. Again, it can show us aneurysms. And aneurysm, if a person has an aneurysm that hasn't burst yet, of course, early detection via imaging such as this can be very helpful for the doctor. This very busy slide is showing us the abdominal aortic blood flow. All right, so the abdominal aorta, all right, which is it's labeling at the top right here. All right, the abdominal aorta is basically a continuation of the descending thoracic aorta, and it's responsible for supplying blood to the abdominal organs, the pelvis, and also our lower limbs. So it serves basically as a main arterial trunk in the abdomen, and it also gives rise to several other major branches. So this diagram is just showing us how that blood is distributed through the visceral organ branches and also the parietal, which are the body wall branches. All right, so the abdominal aorta again gives rise to three major what we call unpaired arteries and several paired arteries. All right, so the unpaired visceral branches that supply our digestive organs are the celiac trunk that you see right here. All right, the celiac trunk is basically that first major branch. It supplies the stomach, it supplies the liver, it supplies the pancreas, and it also supplies the spleen. All right, so some of the key branches are the left gastric artery. All right, and the left gastric artery supplies the stomach and the esophagus. And then we have the splenic artery. Splenic artery feeds the spleen, the pancreas, and the stomach. And then we have the common hepatic artery. And the common hepatic artery supplies the liver, the gallbladder, and also the stomach. All right, then we have the superior mesenteric artery. All right, and the superior mesenteric artery, which is here, supplies the small intestines. It supplies the first half of the large intestine, and it also supplies the colon. All right, so this is again one of the major branches of the major branches of the abdominal aorta. So the first one was the celiac trunk, and now we're looking at the superior mesenteric artery. All right, so the superior mesenteric artery, again, we said it supplies the small intestine and the first half of the large intestine, or the colon. All right, so some of the key branches that it has is the intestinal arteries. I'm sorry. Yeah, intestinal arteries. All right. And the intestinal arteries are basically they're the arteries that feed the jejunum and the ileum. So again, parts of the small intestine and the colon. It also supplies the right colic artery, which is, I'm sorry, it also gives rise to the right colic artery, which supplies the ascending colon. And then it also gives rise to the middle colic artery, which feeds the transverse colon. All right, and then the last major branch is the inferior mesenteric artery. All right, the inferior mesenteric artery, which is, where is it located? Inferior. Inferior mesenteric artery. I see the superior mesenteric. This is so small. Oh, inferior mesenteric artery is right there. And the inferior mesenteric artery supplies the lower portion of the large intestine, like our descending colon and our sigmoid colon, and also the rectum. And some of the key branches of that one are the left colic artery, which feeds the descending colon, the sigmoid arteries, which supply the sigmoid colon, and also the superior rectal artery, which feeds our rectum. In terms of the paired visceral branches, so they supply organs in pairs. We have the renal arteries, all right, and our renal arteries supply the kidneys. They supply they also help regulate blood pressure and filtration. All right, we also have the gonadal arteries, and they supply the ovaries, the ovarian artery, and also the testes, which are the testicular arteries. So we're looking at these arteries down here. And then the suprarenal arteries, and the suprarenal arteries feed the adrenal, suprarenal arteries feed the adrenal glands, which produce hormones like adrenaline and also cortisol. All right, next arteries that we're looking at are the parietal arteries. So basically the body wall or branches of the abdominal aorta. So these arteries supply the muscles and also the bones of the abdominal wall and also the spine. All right, so we have the lumbar arteries. So we're over here now. All right, lumbar arteries, they supply the lower back, the muscles, and also the vertebrae. And then we have the middle sacral arteries. They feed the sacrum and also the coccyx. And then we have the terminal branches of the abdominal aorta. So at the lower end, the abdominal aorta splits into two. So we have the right and left common iliac arteries. All right, the right and left common iliac arteries. Oh no, that's the colic. Right and left common iliac arteries. Which I don't see. But in terms of what they do, they basically supply blood to the pelvis and also the lower limbs. So they further, in terms of the right and left common iliac arteries, they further divide into the internal iliac artery, which supplies the pelvic organs like the bladder and our reproductive organs. And then we also have what we call an external iliac artery, which becomes that femoral artery, which supplies the legs. All right, and that is pretty much what this busy slide is showing us, just the blood flow from the abdominal aortic artery down. Now we're looking at major arteries of the upper extremity. So our upper extremities are our arms, our forearms, and also our hands. So they also require a continuous blood supply, just like the rest of our body, for movement, for sensation, and also for function. So this slide basically just shows the major arteries that branch from the subclavian artery and extend down the arm. So the images that we're looking at, image A is an arteriogram of the brachial and also the upper forearm arteries. Image B is a diagram of the major arteries of the upper limb. Of course, we're looking at an anterior view. And image C is an arteriogram of the arteries in the hand. So the blood supply from the upper arm basically comes from the heart down to the fingertips. So the subclavian artery is the main artery that supplies the blood to the arm. All right, and it travels under the clavicle, which is our collarbone, before it becomes what we call an axillary artery, or what we call the axillary artery. So the axillary artery is found underneath the armpit. All right, and it supplies the blood to our shoulder muscles, the chest wall, and also our upper arm, and it gives rise to what we call the humeral circumflex arteries, which supply our shoulder joint. So the brachial artery, which is pictured here as well. The brachial artery is basically the artery of the upper arm, and it does extend from the axillary artery, and it runs alongside our humerus and is also commonly used to measure blood pressure if we're measuring a person's blood pressure. All right, and it gives rise to deep brachial arteries, which supply our triceps. All right, then we have our radial and our ulnar arteries. And the radial artery, all right, the radial artery is on the lateral side near the thumb. All right, it's the main artery used for taking pulse if we need to take a person's pulse. And it also supplies blood to the wrist and also the hand. And then we have our ulnar artery, and the ulnar artery, which is on the medial side near the pinky, it helps supply the forearm and also the hand. So these arteries, they have that these have anastomosis as well. So they connect to form what we call the palmar arches in the hand. All right, and the palmar arches in the hand, they basically, the blood flows from the radial and the ulnar arteries, and it meets in the hand, forming what we call superficial and also deep palmar arches. And these arches basically supply the fingers, so they're called digital arteries. So they supply the fingers, ensuring that we have proper circulation. So in terms of why these might be important, the radial artery is where you as a nurse will check the pulse. So the radial artery is, again, a common site for checking the pulse, and doctors use it also because it's superficial and easy to access. In terms of blood pressure measurement, the brachial artery is what we use. All right, so we typically will use a sphygmomanometer and take the blood pressure. All right, in terms of some injuries that could compromise blood flow, fractures or trauma, such as a broken, let's say a broken humerus, it can damage the brachial artery, leading to, it could cause severe blood loss. Also, a condition called, if you like to type a lot, carpal tunnel syndrome, that sometimes affects our radial arteries. It reduces blood supply in the hand. All right, so these again we're just looking at some of the major arteries of the upper arm. So again, the radial artery is a major site for pulse taking, and the brachial artery is used to take blood pressure. And of course, the palmar arches, they supply blood to the fingers. more so at the aortic arch blood flow, but now we're going to mainly just focus on the upper limb because that's what we just went over. So again, the aortic arch basically distributes oxygenated blood from the heart to the head, to the neck, and also to the upper limb. So basically, this slide is showing us all of that blood flow pathways from the aortic arch into three major branches, which we talked about earlier. And those three major branches were the brachiocephalic artery, which is only on the right side, the left common carotid artery, and then also the left subclavian artery. So the one that I kind of want to focus on only is the one that supplies the upper limbs. All right, so again, the brachiocephalic artery, which is only on the right side, the artery branches off first, and it's of course exclusive to only the right side, and it splits into what we call the right common carotid artery and also the right subclavian artery. All right, so we're over here. All right, we're talking about the brachiocephalic. All right, and the right common carotid artery supplies the right side of our head and the brain, but the right subclavian artery feeds our right upper limb. So the reason why I wanted to only focus on that is because we just looked at the upper limbs. All right, so the second major branch was the left common carotid artery. Again, it arises directly from that aortic arch, and it gives rise, I'm sorry, the left, did I say the left common carotid artery? It directly arises from the aortic arch, and it supplies the left side of the head and brain. And then last but not least, we have the left subclavian artery, which we see right here. And the left subclavian artery again originates directly from the aortic arch, and it supplies the left upper limb, and also some of the branches go on to the thoracic region. So the left subclavian artery and also the right subclavian artery are what we're interested in as far as supplying that blood to our upper limbs. So again, they run down the arm and they become the axillary arteries, the brachial arteries, and the radial and ulnar arteries. So the axillary arteries, they supply the shoulder and also the upper arms. All right, the brachial arteries, which are also main arteries. So let's just focus on the right side. So we looked at the, So we looked at the axillary artery. Now the brachial artery, it's the main artery of the upper arm. Again, that's the one where we use to take those blood pressure measurements. And then last but not least, we have the radial and ulnar arteries. All right, the radial and ulnar arteries. There's the radial arteries and the ulnar arteries. Oh, there we go. Radial and ulnar arteries, and those supply blood to the forearm and also the hand. So again, as far as the radial artery is concerned, that's a place where we check the pulse, again, at that wrist area. So again, the vertebral arteries, they branch. They're branches of the subclavian arteries. They travel through the cervical spine, and they merge to form the basal artery, which supplies the brainstem and also the cerebellum. and it's also important for that posterior circulation to the brain. So some of the so that's really only the ones that I wanted to focus on for that chart, for this chart, because we just went over the upper limb. So now we're going to move into major arteries that supply the lower limb. So now we're looking at major arteries that supply blood to our lower limb or our lower extremities. They also require a continuous blood supply, again, for movement, for sensation, and also for our tissue health. So we're looking at some images here. Image A is basically a diagram of those major arteries of the lower extremity. Of course, we're looking at an anterior view, or the front of the lower limb. Image B is a femoral arteriogram, basically showing the blood flow from the external iliac artery into the femoral artery. And then image C, we're looking at a popliteal arteriogram, which is highlighting circulation around the knee joint. All right, so some of the major arteries of the lower limb, again, that supply the blood supply to the lower limb, are the external iliac artery. All right, and the external iliac artery, basically it originates in the abdomen. All right, so not at the aorta, but in the abdomen. All right, and it continues on. It's a continuation basically of that common iliac artery. All right, and it passes through what we call an inguinal ligament, and it becomes the femoral artery. All right, so the femoral artery is a main artery of our thigh, and it travels along the anterior thigh, and it supplies blood to our quadricep muscles and also our hip joints. It does give rise to some deeper femoral arteries, like the what we call profunda femoris, which supply the hamstrings, also the adductors, and also the femur. So basically ensures we have circulation in that area. Another artery, so we were just talking about the femoral artery, sorry. Another artery that's important down here is the popliteal artery, which is here. All right, and the popliteal artery is basically behind the knee, and that artery transitions into the popliteal artery as it passes through the adductor hiatus, which supplies blood to our knee joints and also surrounding muscles. All right, also down here we have the tibial and fibular arteries. So there's a fibular artery, tibial artery here. All right, and those basically are arteries for the lower leg and also the foot. So the popliteal artery does split into the anterior tibial artery, which supplies the front of our leg, including the shin area and the dorsum of the foot. And then we have a posterior tibial artery, which feeds the back of our leg and also the bottom or the plantar surface of our foot. The fibular artery, also called the peroneal artery, provides blood flow to our lateral leg and also our ankle. All right, and then we have the dorsalis pedis. All right, and the dorsalis pedis artery is found on top of the foot. We can check circulation in diabetic patients there. And then we have the plantar arteries. All right, the plantar arteries, they basically supply the bottom of our foot through the medial and the lateral plantar arteries. All right, so the plantar arteries. All right, so clinically speaking, if we're talking about blockages in the lower limb, we're talking about things such as peripheral artery disease. So blockages in the femoral or the tibial arteries can lead to things like pain, cramping, and also poor wound healing if we're talking about like a diabetic patient. So this peripheral artery disease is more common, I'll say, in diabetics. So a way to check for proper perfusion in that area is to check the dorsalis pedis pulse. All right, so basically if they have a weak pulse there, it basically suggests that there's a reduced blood flow in that foot area. Another thing that could happen in the lower limb is something called deep vein thrombosis or DVT versus arterial blockage. So DVT occurs in the veins with those PAD patients. So PAD, we're talking about peripheral artery disease. If they have DVT, it could show up as swelling and also warmth in that area. Also, they could have what we call a cold, like their in PAD patients, their limb can be colder, and also they will have that weak pulse there. If, of course, it's not corrected or treated, in a diabetic patient, that poor circulation in that tibial and plantar artery increases that risk of tissue death, which could lead to gangrene, which could lead to that person needing to have a leg amputation. So again, this basically, we're just looking at only the arteries that supply the lower limb. Now we're looking at the arterial blood flow of the lower limb. So we looked at a previous busy slide of the blood flow from the aorta to the upper limbs and also the head. So now we're looking at the arterial blood flow of just the lower extremity. So this diagram is basically showing us how oxygenated blood flows from the heart to the lower limb. So the abdominal aorta supplies the right and the left lower extremities through its major branches. So you see we start with the abdominal aorta. Blood then has to pass or travel through multiple arteries in order to reach the feet and also the toes to ensure that that person has proper circulation. So again, we start at the abdominal aorta. And then we branch into the common iliac arteries. All right, so here are the common iliac arteries. We have a right and a left. All right, the abdominal aorta again splits into the right common iliac artery, which supplies the right leg, and then the left common iliac artery, which supplies the right leg. All right, the common iliac arteries then split into external and internal iliac arteries. All right, so external and internal iliac arteries. All right, so the external iliac artery continues towards the leg and eventually becomes the femoral artery, and the internal iliac artery supplies the pelvic organs and also our glute muscles. All right, so we said that the external iliac artery becomes the femoral artery. So the femoral artery then goes to the popliteal artery, all right, which we see here. All right, and the femoral artery is basically the main blood supplier to the thigh. All right, and it gives rise to what we call the profunda femoris, which are the deep femoral arteries that feed the hamstrings and also the thigh muscles. And we also have the superficial femoral arteries, which continue down towards the knee. So once the femoral artery reaches the knee, it becomes the popliteal artery. All right, it becomes the popliteal artery. All right, and where is the popliteal artery? Oh, here, popliteal artery. All right, and the popliteal artery continues on to the tibial and the fibular arteries. All right, you can see tibial artery here and fibular, fibular artery there. All right, and the popliteal artery again splits into the anterior tibial artery, which supplies the front of the lower leg and also the top of the foot. We have a posterior tibial artery, which supplies the calf and also the bottom of the foot. And then we have a fibular or a peroneal artery, which feeds the lateral leg muscles. All right, in terms of foot circulation, we have the dorsal and the plantar arteries. All right, and the dorsal and the plantar, or the dorsalis pedis artery, which is a continuation of that anterior tibial artery. It's found on the top of the foot. Again, we can use that point to check circulation for persons that have diabetes. The plantar arteries are a continuation of that posterior tibial artery. All right, so we have a medial and a lateral plantar arteries that supply the bottom or the sole of the foot, and we have plantar digital arteries that deliver blood to our toes. So again, conditions that we might see that may have us checking the blood flow in this particular area are going to be that peripheral artery disease, where blockages in the femoral, tibial, or the popliteal arteries can reduce blood flow and lead to pain, which we call claudation, slow wound healing, especially in diabetics, and also gangrene, which could eventually lead to that person needing an amputation. Again, if the person has a weak dorsalis pedis pulse, that could suggest to us that there's some sort of circulatory issue there. And that is pretty much it for this slide. Now we're going to discuss systemic veins. So veins, we already know they're responsible for um, returning blood to the heart after oxygen and nutrients have been delivered to our tissues. So unlike the arteries, veins, again, they have a thinner walls, and they also contain valves, and those valves are going to help prevent that backflow since the venous blood pressure is lower. All right, and again, especially when we're talking about our lower limbs, we're returning that blood back to the heart. So we need those valves to help prevent that backflow of blood. So systemic veins ultimately lead to the superior and also the inferior vena cava, which drain into the right atrium of the heart. So in terms of the pathway of that venous blood flow, capillaries go to venules, go to veins. So the blood from the capillaries will drain into small venules, which will merge into larger veins as blood is returned back to the heart. So this gradual merging is going to allow for a more efficient transport of that deoxygenated blood. So we have dural sinuses, and these are veins that are the veins that are in our brain. Large veins in our cranial cavity, again, they're called dural sinuses. And these sinuses, they don't have valves, and the sinuses don't have valves, and they're critical for draining that blood from the vein into our internal jugular veins. Um, Anastomosis is mentioned here again, is because the veins can also interconnect more frequently than arteries and provide alternate pathways for that blood to return. So this reduces the risk of blockages and ensure that that venous blood can still reach the heart even if one pathway is obstructed. So venous drainage into the superior vena cava, so basically blood from the head The neck, the arms, and also the thoracic cavity, they drain into the superior vena cava, which empties into our right atrium. So this process basically ensures that oxygen depleted blood or oxygen poor blood reaches the heart efficiently so that it can receive that oxygen that it needs in the lungs. So unlike arteries, again, veins are highly variable in terms of their pathway. So we have additional veins or different branching patterns, and this makes venous anatomy less predictable than that arterial anatomy that we looked at. So again, some people can have extra, what we call external jugular veins, while others might have veins that take slightly different pathways. So it's important, especially in medical procedures like drawing blood and also placing IV lines. So, um, in terms of clinical, um, relevance, when in terms of varicose veins, these are conditions that can happen in the veins. These are we have venous valves that weaken and blood pools in those veins, causing them to swell and bulge. So most common, these varicose veins are most common in the legs, where gravity makes that blood return a lot more difficult because it has to travel a further distance. Another condition is deep vein thrombosis. So a blood clot in a deep vein, often again happening in the legs, can block circulation. If that clot breaks loose, it can eventually travel to the lungs and cause a life-threatening pulmonary embolism for the patient. Another condition that could happen in terms of veins is jugular vein distension. So if, let's say, the right atrium struggles to pump blood, veins in the neck, they can visibly become swollen. So this can indicate heart failure and also fluid overload. So again, think of these veins as return highways for the blood. All right, in terms of venous drainage of our thoracic organs, we're talking about the heart, the lungs, and also the esophagus. Um, the thoracic organs, they return deoxygenated blood to the superior vena cava. So this happens either directly or via the azygos vein system. And the azygos vein system is basically a network of veins on the back of the thoracic cavity, and it provides an alternate route for that venous return to the heart. Hepatic portal circulation is also a unique venous system as well. So the hepatic portal system is basically a special circulation route. So unlike other veins that return blood directly to the heart, this system first sends that blood to the liver. All right, so in terms of function, veins from the spleen, the stomach, the pancreas, the gallbladder, and the intestines, they drain into the hepatic portal vein, and this allows the liver to process the nutrients and also filter out toxins before that blood enters that inferior vena cava. So in the liver sinusoids, venous blood from our digestive organs mix with oxygen-rich arterial blood, and in terms of the hepatic veins, eventually return that filtered blood to the inferior vena cava. So why is this important? It's important because the liver is basically acting as a filter to process nutrients and also detoxify substances before that blood circulates to the rest of the body. So, an example, alcohol absorbed by the digestive system first goes to the liver for detoxification. So, again, venous drainage is a little different when it comes to hepatic portal circulation. All right, the last bullet point here, venous drainage of the lower extremities in the abdomen. So blood from the lower body and the abdomen. They also drain into the inferior vena cava, and this includes blood from the legs, and that's via the femoral and iliac veins, and also the kidneys via the renal veins, and also the liver via the hepatic veins after, of course, their process. So since that inferior vena cava is under low pressure, venous blood flow basically depends on gravity. It depends on muscle contractions, and it also depends on valves. And again, those valves are going to prevent that backflow of blood. So some of the corresponding arteries and veins, major veins, they basically have the same names as the arteries. So the femoral artery and the femoral vein, they basically run alongside each other. So basically they're parallel structures, and it allows for a more efficient circulation and organization of those blood vessels in the body. Deep veins versus superficial veins. Deep veins are located, of course, deep in the muscles and typically still run alongside arteries like our femoral vein and the brachial vein. And superficial veins, they're a lot closer to the skin, and they're used for IV access and also for blood draw. So like our cephalic vein, the basilic vein, and also the great saphenous vein. So in terms of medical importance, superficial veins are used for drawing blood and IV insertion, and deep veins are important in terms of deep vein thrombosis, where clots can potentially form and travel up to the lungs, causing that pulmonary embolism. So again, this is your introduction to your systemic veins. Now we're looking at principal veins in the body. So this diagram basically highlights the major veins that are responsible for getting that deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So unlike the arteries, again, we already know that veins have thinner walls. They do contain valves, and they allow muscle contractions to help move that blood back to the heart. So veins, again, they're categorized into superficial veins, those that are close to the skin, and we can often see those, and then the deep veins, which run alongside those major arteries in the body that are responsible for most of the venous blood return. So some of the major veins that are listed here in terms of our head and neck, and we'll look at them a little bit deeper on other slides. We can see the external jugular vein. It's basically responsible for draining blood from the scalp and the face. The internal jugular vein is responsible for draining blood from the brain, and also merging with that subclavian vein. And then the brachiocephalic veins are formed by the merging of the jugular and the subclavian veins, leading into the superior vena cava. In terms of our upper limbs, the superficial veins that we see there are the cephalic vein, which runs alongside the lateral arm, and it's also a common area where we use for IV insertions. The basilic vein runs alongside the medial portion of the arm, and then we have the median cubical vein. That one connects the cephalic and the basilic vein at the elbow. That's one of the most common areas or sites for blood draw. All right, in terms of deep veins, we have the radial and ulnar veins, and they drain the forearm and they merge to form the brachial vein. And then we have the subclavian vein, which collects blood from the upper limb and also merging into the brachiocephalic vein. All right, in terms of the thoracic and abdominal veins, we have the superior vena cava, which receives blood from the head, the neck, the arms, and also the thorax, and it drains it into the right atrium. We have the inferior vena cava, which draws blood from the lower body and to the right atrium. We have the hepatic veins, which drain blood from the liver after it's been filtered. And then we also have the renal veins that carry blood from the kidneys to the inferior vena cava. And then last but not least, in terms of our lower limb veins, we have superficial veins and also deep veins as well. One of the superficial veins, we have the great saphenous vein. That's the longest vein in our body, and it runs from the foot to the thigh, and it's often used in surgeries like coronary bypass surgery. We have the small saphenous vein that runs along the back of the leg, draining into the popliteal vein. And in terms of deep veins, we have the femoral vein, which drains blood from the thigh and it merges into the external iliac vein. And then we have the popliteal vein, which is located behind the knee, and it's formed by the merger of the anterior and posterior tibial veins. So that is pretty much it for this slide. Now we're going to take a closer look at some of these veins. Alright, so now we're just taking a look at the major veins of the head and neck more up close and personal. So basically the veins that drain the head and the neck, basically again responsible for draining that deoxygenated blood from the brain, the face, and also the scalp and taking it back to the heart. So these veins connect with the superior vena cava, which ultimately returns that blood to the right atrium for us. So two major venous systems. Again, we have superficial veins and we have deep veins. So the superficial veins drain blood from the skin and the face, and those deep veins drain the blood from the brain and also the muscles. All right, so the first one we're going to take a look at is the internal jugular vein, all right, which is right here. All right, the internal jugular vein, that's the largest vein in the neck. All right, so it's responsible for draining blood from the brain, the face, and also some of the deep neck structures. So it does run alongside the carotid artery, and it's often used for a central venous catheter in the hospital if they needed to. All right, then we have the external jugular vein. All right, and the external jugular vein is smaller than the internal vein, but it collects blood from the scalp and also the superficial face, located a lot closer to the surface, and it's visible. Sometimes makes it visible in people that have low body fat. All right, then we have the facial vein. All right, and that drains blood from the skin and the muscles of the face. It does connect to the internal jugular vein, and in terms of medical importance, the facial vein has direct connections to deep veins, making it a potential route for infections. All right, so it's basically in terms of a term called the danger triangle, infections near the nose can spread to the brain. All right, then we have the retromandibular vein, which is located behind the jaw, and the jaw, another name for jaw is the mandible, and it drains blood from the deep face and also jaw muscles. It connects with both the external and the internal jugular veins. Then we have the subclavian vein, and that's located below the clavicle or the collarbone, and it collects blood from the arms and also the external jugular vein, merging with the internal jugular and also the vein, merging with the internal jugular vein to form the brachiocephalic vein. The brachiocephalic vein, and this is the right one right here, is formed by the internal jugular and the subclavian veins, and both the right and left brachiocephalic veins merge to form the superior vena cava, which returns blood to the right atrium of the heart. All right, then we have the azygos vein here, and that vein runs along the spine, and it provides, of course, an alternate pathway for that venous return to the heart. It connects the superior and the inferior vena cava, and it helps bypass blockages when we're talking about venous circulation. All right, so that is pretty much it for this slide. All right, in this slide, we're taking a closer look at the veins that are responsible for draining the head, neck, or the brain, so to speak. So unlike other veins in the body, these veins, the veins are inside the brain. They don't have the traditional valves that regulate the blood flow. So instead, they drain into large channels called durovenous sinuses, which collect blood from the vein and direct it toward the internal jugular vein. So this image is just basically showing a lateral, I'll say superior view of those major veins and sinuses of the brain. All right, so we have what we call a superior sagittal sinus, which is here, and that's one of the largest venous sinuses in the brain, and it runs along the midline of the brain, and it collects blood from the cerebral brain. So it drains into the transverse sinus, which is here, and it eventually drains into the internal jugular vein, which is here. All right, the inferior sagittal sinus, which is here, it is located below that superior sagittal sinus and along the lower part of what we call the falx cerebri, which is a membrane, the membrane of the brain. So it joins the straight sinus and also the straight sinus, and then it connects with the transverse sinus. All right, so that is your internal sagittal sinus. All right, next we have the transverse sinus, all right, which is over here. All right, I didn't point out the straight sinus that we were talking about. All right, the transverse sinus, it receives blood from the superior sagittal sinus and also the straight sinus. So superior sagittal sinus and also the straight sinus. So it receives blood from those two, and it drains them into the sigmoid sinus, which is here, and it continues as the internal jugular vein, which is here. All right, and then we have the sigmoid sinus, which is here, and its sigmoid it's S-shaped or S in shape. That's why we call it sigmoid, and it's located at the base of the skull, and it directly drains into the internal jugular vein, which is here. So the internal jugular vein is what carries the blood out of the skull. All right, then we have what we call the cavernous sinus, which is here. It's found on either side of our sella turcica, which is a depression in the skull where the pituitary gland sits, and it drains blood from the eye and the face via what we call ophthalmic veins, which are here. And medical wise, why this is important is this particular sinus is linked to what the danger triangle again of the face, where infections from the nose or the face can spread and cause brain infections. All right, so an example is cavernous sinus thrombosis. All right, in terms of those ophthalmic veins, they drain blood from the eye and also the orbit into that cavernous sinus, which is there. It provides basically a direct connection between the superficial and also those deep venous, the deep venous drainage, which can be a pathway for infections as well to spread to the vein. All right, and then last but not least, we have the inferior petrosal sinus, and that one connects the cavernous sinus to the internal jugular vein, and it allows that blood to exit the skull. All right, so clinical relevance here, the dural venous sinuses, again, they lack those valves, so blood can flow in multiple directions. So this, again, makes them more vulnerable to infections that spread from other parts of the body, like the face, the scalp, and also the nasal cavity. One such condition that can be life-threatening is the cavernous sinus thrombosis. That's where we have a blood clot that forms in that cavernous sinus due to some sort of infection. Head trauma or brain swelling can also affect venous drainage and lead to increased intracranial pressure, which can also be dangerous. So this is your drainage pathways for the head, neck, and brain. Now we're taking a closer look at the upper extremity veins. So basically, veins in our upper extremity that are returning that deoxygenated blood to the heart. So again, unlike the arteries, the veins are thinner. All right, they contain those valves to help prevent that backflow of blood. So this diagram again is providing an anterior view or front view of the major veins that we have in our arm. So the first one we can take a look at is the cephalic vein. All right, and it runs basically along the outer or the lateral side of our arm from the wrist to the subclavian vein, which is up here. And basically, it's a superficial vein. Often, this one is going to be used for IV cannulization or blood draws. All right, the basilic vein, which is here, runs alongside the inner or the medial side of our arm from the hand to the axillary vein, which is up here. And it's another superficial vein, often used for central venous access if we needed it. All right, another one that we can look at is the median cubital vein, or the basilic vein connection. Basically, it's like a short connecting vein between the cephalic and the basilic veins, and it's found in our antecubital fossa. So basically the elbow crease area. And this is most commonly used when we want to draw blood in terms of phlebotomy. Also, IV insertions can happen here because it is large, it is superficial, and also we can easily access that one. All right, we have the radial and the ulnar veins as well. I see the radial, ulnar here. Radial and ulnar veins as well. These are deep veins. They run alongside their corresponding radial and ulnar arteries. So they do play a huge role in that venous return from the forearm, and they also drain into the brachial veins. All right, the brachial veins, which are here, they are found again deeper in the arm, running parallel to that brachial artery. And they collect blood from the radial and the ulnar veins, and they transport it up to that axillary vein, which is up here. All right, axillary and the subclavian vein. So axillary vein, it's a continuation of that basilic vein, collecting blood from both deep and superficial veins in the arm, and the subclavian vein, where the axillary vein merges with the cephalic vein, eventually leading into the brachiocephalic vein and the superior vena cava. All right, so again, clinically important, some of these veins are: one, the median cubital vein is probably one of the #1 choices for drawing blood. The reason is because it's large. Typically, it's going to be visible, and it has fewer surrounding nerves, reducing pain risk. It also has strong walls, minimizing the risk of it collapsing. So if the median cubital vein is unavailable, of course, we can use the cephalic vein along the lateral side, or the basilic vein, which is basically, if you're using it, it has arteries near it, so again, it's a more riskier option. All right, and that is pretty much it for veins of the upper extremities. We're looking at a very, very busy slide again: blood flow into the superior vena cava. So we're basically looking at the pathways that not only the upper extremity takes, but also the veins that are in the head as well. So we're starting with the superior vena cava. So basically, that's a major vein that carries that deoxygenated blood from the upper body to the right atrium of the heart. So again, this diagram is kind of showing us visually how venous blood flows into the superior vena cava, highlighting those major tributaries in those areas. So again, unlike arteries, veins, they have a greater variability among individuals. So some venous pathways may differ a little bit. So the superior vena cava is formed, of course, by merging several key veins. So we have the superior vena cava here. The first one is the brachiocephalic vein, which is here. Also, we have the subclavian vein, which is here, and then the internal and external jugular veins, and then also the azygos vein system. So in terms of the brachiocephalic veins, we have a right one and also a left one, and they the subclavian and the internal jugular veins merge to form that brachiocephalic vein. So again, they carry blood from the head, neck, and also the upper limbs into the superior vena cava. The subclavian vein, basically responsible for draining blood from the upper extremities, like the arms and the shoulders, and it merges with the internal jugular vein to form the brachiocephalic vein. And then your internal external jugular veins, basically the internal jugular vein drains blood from the brain, the face, and also the deep parts of the neck. The external jugular vein drains blood from the scalp and the superficial parts of the face, and both of those veins eventually will empty into that brachiocephalic vein as well. The azygos vein system basically provides us with an alternate pathway for blood to return from the thorax and the abdomen if that inferior vena cava is blocked. So azygos veins, basically they drain posterior, the posterior thoracic wall and also the abdominal wall, and they empty directly into the superior vena cava. We also have azygos and accessory veins as well, and they drain the left thoracic wall and the posterior chest before they empty into the azygos vein. So in terms of blood flow from the brain and the face, the brain and the face have, again, we talked about those complex venous drainage systems, which are, we're talking about this over here, that eventually empty into that superior vena cava. So we have that dural venous sinus in this area. All right, and again, these are large collecting veins in the brain that drain blood into that internal jugular vein, and they include the superior sagittal sinus, the transverse sinus, and also that sigmoid sinus. So in terms of facial and ophthalmic veins that deal with the eyes, blood from the face and the eyes drain into the internal jugular vein, and they contribute to the superior vena cava. So again, this is just a visual of kind of how the blood, how the blood travels back to the heart via some of these veins and sinuses that we discussed on the earlier pictures or earlier slides. Now we're looking at the IVC, or the inferior vena cava, which is the largest vein in our body. It is responsible again for returning that deoxygenated blood from the lower body to the right atrium of our heart. So this picture basically shows us an interior view or front view of the IVC and its tributaries in the abdominal pelvic region. So we're talking about more the lower portion of our body, which that has a lot of visceral organs. Those visceral organs are removed so we can see the IVC better. So the IVC runs parallel to our descending aorta. So basically emphasizing basically a close anatomical relationship between that venous and also the arterial system. So some of the major tributaries of the IVC, basically we're talking about tributaries. These are basically unions that form in order to drain that blood from different regions of the body. So the first one that we can talk about is the common iliac vein. All right, the common iliac vein is down here in this area. All right, and the common iliac veins, we have a left one and we also have a right one. And they're the primary veins, their function, they drain the lower extremities and also the pelvis. So the right and the left common iliac vein, they do merge to form the inferior vena cava. All right, then we have the renal veins. All right, the renal veins. And the renal veins, we have a left and right one as well. They drain deoxygenated blood from the kidneys into the IVC. All right, and the left renal vein is a little bit longer than the right one, and that's because the IVC is located slightly to the right of the midline. All right, then we have the hepatic veins as well. All right, and the hepatic veins drain blood from the liver into the IVC after it's been processed by the hepatic portal system. All right, then we have gonadal veins as well. All right, and the gonadal veins, whether we're talking about testicular or the ovarian ones, we have right gonadal veins that drain directly into the IVC, and we have left gonadal veins that drain into the left renal vein first before it reaches the IVC. All right, which we have there. All right, then we have lumbar and phrenic veins. All right, and our lumbar and our phrenic veins, they drain the posterior abdominal wall and also muscles. The phrenic veins drain the diaphragm. Now, as far as connections between the IVC and the azygos system, the IVC doesn't have a direct tributaries from the thoracic wall. So instead, blood from the region is drained through that azygos system before it reaches that superior vena cava. So azygos veins basically receive blood from the right side of our thorax and they connect to the superior vena cava. Hemiazygos veins, And also accessory hemiazygos veins, they drain the left side of our thorax, eventually emptying into the azygos vein on the right. So again, this system provides like a collateral pathway for our venous return if the IVC is obstructed. So now we're looking at hepatic portal circulation. So the hepatic portal circulation is a little bit more unique venous system that connects our gastrointestinal tract and also some of the other abdominal organs directly to our liver before it reaches the heart. So the system differs from our standard venous circulation because it involves a vein, and that vein is the hepatic portal vein, which is situated between two capillary beds. So one in the digestive organs and another one is in the liver. So the hepatic portal vein basically delivers nutrient-rich but deoxygenated blood from the digestive tract, the pancreas, the spleen, and also the gallbladder to the liver so that it can process it before it enters our systemic circulation. So the major veins that contribute to the hepatic portal circulation are the hepatic portal vein, which is basically the primary vessel that's responsible for transporting blood from our abdominal organs to the liver. It's formed by the union of what we call the supramesenteric vein and also the splenic vein. All right, so both of those form the hepatic portal vein. The supramesenteric vein, if we're talking about that one, or the mesenteric vein, drains blood from our small intestines, the ascending colon, and also some parts of the stomach, and it carries nutrients that are absorbed from food to our liver. The splenic vein drains blood from the spleen, the pancreas, and also the stomach, and the splenic vein merges with our inferior mesenteric vein, with our inferior mesenteric vein before forming that hepatic portal. So in terms of the inferior mesenteric vein, it drains blood from the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and also the rectum. Typically, it joins the splenic vein before it empties into the portal vein. The gastric and the gastroepiloic veins which are here, they drain blood from the stomach and they contribute to the hepatic portal vein. Our hepatic veins themselves, after blood is filtered through the liver, the hepatic veins return that processed blood to the inferior vena cava, and that of course transports it back to the right atrium of the heart. All right, so again, the hepatic portal circulation is very important for maintaining homeostasis, and it also allows the liver to detoxify harmful substances before they reach general circulation. So it regulates glucose levels by storing and releasing glucose. It processes absorbed nutrients from digestion, and it also metabolizes things such as drugs and any other toxins before they reach our systemic circulation. So again, the liver acts as a filter and processing center to ensure that the blood entering our general circulation is properly regulated. So now we're taking a closer look at some of those major veins that are in our lower extremities. All right, and we call, basically we're talking about the venous system of the lower extremity. Again, it's responsible for returning that deoxygenated blood from our legs and also our feet back to the heart. So this particular system does both consist of deep veins and superficial veins as well. The deep veins, they're going to run alongside the arteries, and the superficial veins, again, they're going to be closer to the surface of the skin. So we do need proper venous return from the lower extremities um, in order to prevent pooling of the blood, the swelling in the lower extremities, and also venous disorders like varicose veins and deep vein thrombosis. So some of the veins that are important in terms of the deep veins that of course accompany arteries and carry most of the blood back to the heart are the femoral vein. All right, that's the primary deep vein of our thigh, and it drains blood from the lower leg into our external iliac vein, all right, which is here. All right, so it does receive receive blood from the great saphenous vein and also the deep thigh veins. All right, and here's the great saphenous vein. All right, the popliteal vein, which is down here, it's located again behind the knee. It receives blood from the lower leg veins before it continues as the femoral vein. All right, again, which is here. All right, the anterior tibial vein, which is here, runs along the front of our lower leg, and it drains blood from the dorsal veins of the feet or the foot. And then we have the posterior tibial vein, and that one runs along the back of our lower leg, and it collects blood from the plantar veins, which are on the bottom of our foot. All right, last but not least, in terms of deep veins, we have the fibular vein, which is also called the peroneal vein, and it's parallel to the fibula or the outer portion of our leg, and this vein helps drain blood from the lateral side of our legs. So in terms of our superficial veins, the ones that are closer to the skin that help with cooling and also with circulation, we have the great saphenous vein, which is the longest vein of the body. It runs from the foot to the groin along the medial or the inner portion of our leg, and it drains into the femoral vein. It's commonly used again for coronary bypass grafts and heart surgery if we needed that. And then we have the small saphenous vein as well, and that one runs along the back of the calf, and it drains into that popliteal vein. So this one is often associated with those varicose veins due to the fact that it's so superficial. So again, the veins of our lower extremities have those one-way valves that are going to help prevent that backflow of blood due to the gravity and the distance that it needs to travel. Muscle contractions in the leg will help also push that blood upward towards the heart. All right, this is the last busy chart that we will look at for the night, and of course it's tracing the blood flow from our lower extremities and also when we're talking about the hepatic veins back to the inferior vena cava. So again, the inferior vena cava, that's that largest vein in the body, responsible for returning that deoxygenated blood from the lower body to the heart. Again, it collects blood from various tributaries, including veins from the legs, the pelvis, the abdomen, and some parts of our thorax. So the IVC empties into the right atrium of the heart, completing that systemic circulation that we talked about earlier on in our session today. So some of the major tributaries that we're going to look at in terms of the lower extremities and the pelvis are going to be, well, we already talked about it earlier, the common iliac. So we're looking more so on this side first, and then eventually we'll go over to the left side. So the common iliac, again, it's formed by the union of the internal and external iliac veins, which you see there, and they carry blood from the legs and the pelvic organs. Then we have the external iliac that continues from our femoral veins, which you can see there. It drains blood from the lower limbs. Then we have the internal iliac. Again, that one drains blood from our pelvic organs, the glute region, and also parts of our reproductive system. All right, so veins from the abdomen and also the organs. Um, we're going to start over here with the renal veins. They drain blood from the kidneys into the IVC. So the left renal vein, we already talked about how it's longer and it receives additional tributaries like the gonadal and the super renal veins. And then we have the hepatic veins here. They drain blood from the liver directly into the IVC. So we already talked about how the liver plays that role of filtering blood before it returns to circulation. We have the hepatic portal vein here, which has an indirect connection to the IVC. So blood from our digestive organs like the stomach, the intestines, the pancreas, and the spleen, they first enter the liver via that hepatic portal vein before being processed and sent to the IVC via that hepatic vein. So again, this ensures that it gets detox and nutrients are processed before the blood enters that general circulation. All right, some more veins of our lower thorax and other regions are going to be those phrenic veins, and they drain blood from the diaphragm into the IVC. We have the ascending lumbar veins. All right, and the ascending lumbar veins, they connect the lower body venous system to the azygos vein, which drains into that superior vena cava. And then we have those gonadal veins, and the gonadal veins, like our ovarian and testicular veins, the right gonadal vein drains directly into the IVC, and the left gonadal vein drains into the left renal vein first, which we see here, before it reaches the IVC. All right, and then last but not least, we have the suprarenal or adrenal veins, and they drain blood from the adrenal glands into the IVC or those renal veins. So again, unlike arteries, veins, they have a greater variability among people in terms of branching patterns, in terms of sizes, and also in terms of connections. So some people have extra venous connections or alternate drainage pathways, especially in the pelvis and also the abdominal region. So basically, we call these collateral veins, and collateral veins can help compensate for some of the blockages in the IVC, like in cases of deep vein thrombosis or IVC compression syndrome as well. All right, the next two slides focus on the basic plan of fetal circulation. So unlike postnatal circulation or our circulation, the fetus doesn't use the lungs or the digestive system to obtain the oxygen and nutrients that it needs. So instead, the fetus relies on the placenta, which is an organ that is going to facilitate that gas exchange and also the nutrient uptake and also waste elimination between the mother and also, or the maternal and also the fetal blood. So fetal circulation requires additional specialized blood cells to connect the fetus to that placenta. So we call, so basically we have umbilical arteries. So there's two umbilical arteries, and they extend from the internal iliac arteries of the fetus. And these arteries are going to carry that deoxygenated blood from the fetus to the placenta so that the gases can be exchanged. Now, the placenta itself is attached to the uterine wall of the mother, and it serves as that site for that oxygen, nutrients, and also that waste exchange. So the fetal and the maternal blood, they never mix directly, but instead they exchange across that placental barrier. So basically, how fetal circulation differs from postnatal circulation is before birth, the fetus receives oxygen, nutrients, everything that they need from the placenta. So, not from the lungs and also not from the digestive system. In terms of waste products from fetal metabolism, like carbon dioxide, they're transferred to the maternal circulation for that elimination. After birth, so meaning at birth, that placenta is no longer available for that oxygen exchange. So now the infant's lungs expand and their blood is now redirected to the pulmonary circulation. So certain fetal structures like the umbilical arteries, also the ductus venous, and also the foramen ovale, they close or shrink as circulation shifts to that adult-like pattern. So in terms of clinical prevalence, um, especially if we're talking about the placenta, things such as placental insufficiency, if that placenta fails to provide that adequate oxygen and nutrients, that fetal growth is going to be restricted or the fetus is going to be distressed. All right, in terms of umbilical cord issues, if the umbilical cord is compressed or it becomes knotted, it can impair that blood flow, leading to hypoxia and other complications in the fetus. Um, in terms of things such as abnormalities when it comes to fetal circulation, we have something called patent ductus arterius, which is a condition where a fetal shunt remains open after birth, and it causes abnormal blood flow between the heart and also the lungs. So basically, the takeaways are the fetus does depend entirely on that placenta for oxygen and nutrients exchange. So the umbilical arteries, they do transport deoxygenated blood from the fetus to the placenta. The placenta acts as that barrier and exchange site, but again, the fetal and the maternal blood, they don't mix. After birth, that circulation is going to shift from the from placental to pulmonary based oxygenation, requiring the fetal blood vessels to adapt. All right, we're still talking about fetal circulation. So again, in that fetal circulation, that oxygenated blood isn't received from the lungs. It's received from the placenta via fetal blood vessels. So several shunts and bypasses do exist to ensure that that oxygen-rich blood is going to reach the vital organs like the brain, while minimizing flow to those non-functioning fetal lungs. So in terms of those veins, we have the umbilical vein, and that vein carries oxygenated blood from the placenta to the fetus. It enters the fetus via the umbilicus or that navel area, and it travels toward the liver. Before reaching the heart, that umbilical vein branches into the liver, and it continues as what we call the ductus venous. All right, the ductus venous is a continuation of the umbilical vein that bypasses most of the liver, and it empties into the IVC or the inferior vena cava. And this allows that oxygenated blood from the placenta to quickly reach the heart and also the brain. All right, the foramen ovale or foramen ovale is a small opening in the septum between the right and the left atria, and it allows oxygenated blood to bypass the right ventricle and the pulmonary circulation, and it directs it straight into the right atrium and the aorta. So it ensures that the brain receives highly oxygenated blood first. All right, the ductus arteriosus is a small vessel that connects the pulmonary trunk to the aortic arch. So since the lungs are not functioning while we're talking about in the mother's womb, this allows most of that blood to bypass the lungs and enter the aorta directly. So it prevents basically unnecessary blood flow to the lungs and redirects it to the systemic circulation. So again, the fetal lungs, they're filled with fluid at this time. So they're not functional and they don't need oxygenated blood. So again, these specialized structures ensure that the oxygenated blood from the placenta is efficiently distributed to the brain and the body without, without passing through the lungs because it doesn't need the lungs. So in terms of postnatal changes or things that happen after birth, we will go into that because we're talking about after the baby takes their first breath and the cord is clamped. We'll go a little bit deeper into it, but postnatal changes. The newborn is going to take its first breath, and that's going to, of course, allow their lungs to expand and increase the blood flow to that pulmonary circulation. So that umbilical cord is then clamped, cutting off that placental circulation because we no longer need it. And then we'll have what we call closure of those fetal shunts. So that foramen ovale or fossa ovalis is which it has increased left atrial pressure. It's going to force that foramen ovale to close and prevent that blood from bypassing the lungs. In terms of the ductus arteriosus, we call ligamentum arteriosum. The ductus arteriosus is going to constrict and close and ensure that the blood flows only through the lungs at that point for oxygenation, and then the ductus venus, which is the ligamentum veniosum, is once that placental circulation stops, the ductus venus is going to close and the blood is going to flow entirely through the liver. All right, so but we'll talk a little bit about that once we get to that slide. So now we're looking at basically an overview of what that placental circulation kind of looks like. So in terms of the placenta, again, it's more of a temporary organ that's going to allow for that gas exchange and nutrients as well as waste between the mother and the fetus. So it serves as basically the lifeline for the baby that's developing, ensuring that it gets the oxygen, the nutrients, and we are removing that metabolic waste. So again, unlike organs, the placenta functions without direct blood mixing between the fetus and the mother. So some of the key structures that are here, we have the maternal blood supply. So the maternal arterioles and venules, which are here, are going to be supplying and draining blood into what we call an intervillous space. All right, and that is within the placenta. All right, the oxygenated blood from the mother is then going to flow into the placenta and bathe the chorionic villi, which we see here, and they are basically contain they basically contain fetal capillaries. So in terms of the fetal blood supply, those fetal arteries and veins are found within that umbilical cord. all right, which is here. The fetal arteries and veins are in the umbilical cord, and they connect the fetus to the placenta. So the umbilical arteries, which we have two, they're going to carry deoxygenated blood from the fetus to the placenta for that gas exchange, and the umbilical vein, which we have one, is going to carry oxygenated blood from the placenta back to that fetus. The chron the chorionic how do we say this word? Chorionic villi. If you're looking at them, they look like finger-like projections in the placenta, and they basically increase the surface area for that efficient exchange of gases and nutrients. And the fetal capillaries that are within the villi are going to absorb that oxygen and nutrients while it releases that carbon dioxide and waste into maternal circulation. So the way that this exchange occurs is through diffusion and also active transport mechanisms that allow these substances to pass between the fetal and the maternal blood. So oxygen and nutrients like glucose, amino acids, vitamins, and fats, they're going to diffuse from the maternal blood into the fetal circulation. Carbon dioxide and other metabolic waste products from the fetus is going to diffuse into the maternal blood for elimination. And the placenta also is going to filter out harmful substances um, through some drugs, alcohol, and also infections that could cross the barrier. So the placenta is going to hopefully filter out some of those things. Um, in terms of the importance of that placental barrier, again, since the fetal and maternal blood don't mix, that is due to the fact that that placental barrier is there. So it's going to prevent direct immune reactions. Also, the barrier, it is semi-permeable, so it is going to allow essential molecules to pass, and it's going to restrict those larger harmful substances to pass. But again, certain viruses, toxins, and medications can cross the placenta, and of course, um, if it does, it can affect fetal development. So, in terms of clinical relevance here, when we talk about that placental insufficiency, if the placenta doesn't function properly, the fetus might not receive the oxygen and nutrients that it needs. So again, that would restrict their growth. When we talk about things such as preeclampsia, which is a condition where poor placental circulation is happening due to high blood pressure, that could potentially endanger not only the baby but also the mother. If we're talking about things such as placental abruption, that's when the placenta detaches prematurely from the uterine wall, and that could, of course, cause the fetus to go into stress, and it could also cause maternal bleeding. And last but not least, in terms of relevance here, we have things such as transmission of infections or torch type infections. So certain infections like toxoplasmosis, rubella, and also cytomegalovirus and herpes, they can cross the placenta and potentially cause birth defects. So this is kind of like an overview or visual of that placental circulation. All right, this slide is just a visual and an overview of the things we discussed in the previous slide. So the key takeaways from this slide is basically when we're talking about the placenta, it is essential for that oxygen and nutrients exchange, and it's acting basically as the fetal lungs, the kidneys, and also the digestive system. In terms of those umbilical arteries, they are going to carry that deoxygenated blood, while the umbilical vein is going to return the oxygenated blood back to the fetus. The placental barrier, that we discussed earlier, that's going to prevent that direct blood mixing while allowing the necessary exchange of nutrients via diffusion. So again, any impairment in this placental function is going to negatively affect that fetal growth and potentially the pregnancy outcome. So again, this is just an overview of the few slides that we discussed previously. Now we're looking at changes in circulation after birth. So before birth, we found out that the placenta and the umbilical vessels are playing that role in supplying oxygen and nutrients to the fetus. At birth, the baby's going to take their first breath. At that first breath, it's going to cause a major circulatory adjustment as the lungs are now functional. So that's going to cut basically cutting off that umbilical cord and stopping that placental circulation, forcing the baby's circulatory system to now adapt. So basically, what happens when we cut the umbilical cord, again, the two umbilical arteries, which in the umbilical vein, and also the placenta, they're no longer going to function. So that blood flow shifts from placental exchange to that pulmonary circulation for oxygenation that we had that we learned about in our previous chapter. So in terms of the umbilical vein, it carried oxygen blood from the placenta while the baby was still in the mother's room. After birth, it becomes the round ligament of the liver called a ligamentum teres, which is basically a remnant, a fibrous remnant of what it was. Ductus uh, venosus is basically it's going to shunt blood from that umbilical vein to bypass the liver, and it's going to become the ligamentum venosum, which is um, in the liver after closure. All right, in terms of the foramen ovale, which was that opening between that left and right atria that allowed oxygenated blood to bypass the lungs when the baby was in the room, in the womb. Now it's functionally it's going to close after birth when the baby breathes due to that the changes in pressure between the atria. So structural closure is going to occur within 9 months, and it's going to become the fossa ovalis. The ductus arteriosus, which was a small vessel that connect the pulmonary artery to the aorta, allowing blood to bypass those fetal lungs. At birth, it's going to constrict and it's going to eventually close, and it's going to become the ligamentum arteriosum. All right, in terms of the placenta, it's no longer needed, and the mother will shed it in the afterbirth along with the remnants of the umbilical vessel. So, again, this is what happens to these vessels that were providing the nutrients and oxygen that the baby needs or needed while they were in the room. So basically, cutting that umbilical cord is going to initiate that transition from placental to pulmonary circulation. So again, several of those fetal structures are going to lose function and close off naturally and transform into ligaments. So that first breath and that circulatory pressure is going to change and drive a lot of these transformations. So failure of these structures to close properly can lead to some cardiac and also vascular conditions within the baby after birth. So this is just an overview or visual of some of those circulatory changes that happen after the baby is born. So again, before birth, the fetus relied on that placenta for oxygen and nutrients because the lungs and the digestive system were not functional. So after birth, the newborn circulatory system has to adapt to the changes of now being outside of the mother's womb. So these changes involve closure and also transformations of some of the fetal circulatory structures into now non-functional remnants. So again, if we're looking at these pictures, and most of these are highlighted in pink, the umbilical arteries before birth, they were needed to carry that deoxygenated blood from the fetus to the placenta. After birth, they're going to constrict and they're going to become umbilical ligaments, so they're no longer functional. The umbilical vein, before birth, it carried oxygenated blood from the placenta to the fetus. After birth, it becomes a round ligament of the liver called the ligamentum teres. All right, the ductus venosus before birth, it allowed oxygen-rich blood from that umbilical vein to bypass the liver and enter the inferior vena cava. And after birth, it becomes the ligamentum venosum, which is basically a remnant of a fibrous remnant in the liver. The foramen ovale before birth, it was an opening between the right and left atria to bypass the lungs. After birth, it closes functionally within hours and structurally within a few months, becoming the fossa ovalis. The ductus arteriosus, before birth, it was a vessel that connected the pulmonary artery to the aorta so that the lungs could be bypassed. And after birth, it closes within a few days and it becomes the ligamentum arteriosum. So basically, now why these changes are necessary, because the lungs now are going to provide that oxygenation instead of the placenta. The circulatory system is going to reroute that blood flow to the lungs, the liver, and also the digestive organs. So failure of these changes, if they didn't happen, would be things such as would lead to things such as congenital heart defects, such as that foramen ovale. If there was a hole, it would mean that there's a hole between the atria that remains open. And as far as the ductus arteriosus, the ducts of the arteriosus, they don't close properly. So these are some failures that could occur after birth. So again, the key takeaway here is basically within the first year of the baby's life, these circulatory changes basically they're going to become permanent. So the baby transitions from that placental dependence to now being independent on their pulmonary, or independent and dependent on their pulmonary circulation. So again, most of those structures will lose function and transform into ligaments. So again, if any of those fetal structures remain open, it may be medically necessary to intervene, and some of them will, of course, be required to medically intervene if they don't close properly. All right, now we're going to discuss disorders of the blood vessel. So basically, blood vessel disorders affect both arteries and also veins, and they could lead to some serious circulatory complications. So disorders of arteries typically result in reduced blood flow to tissues, while disorders of veins often involve blood pooling and also clot formation. So basically, understanding some of these conditions is going to be important to not only prevent but also detect early and also treat. So atherosclerosis is the first one, and it's basically a general term that describes the thickening and also hardening of arterial walls, which can not only reduce the elasticity but also blood flow. The second one is peripheral vascular disease or peripheral arterial disease. And these ones, We have a narrowing of arteries, usually if we're talking about peripheral, in the legs, and it could lead to the patient or person having pain, cramping, and also poor circulation. It can also increase their risk of non-healing ulcers and also infections. All right, the next one is ischemia, necrosis, and gangrene. So ischemia, basically we're talking about a lack of oxygen supply to our tissues due to some sort of arterial blockage. If it's left untreated, it can lead to necrosis, which is tissue death, which can progress into gangrene, which is a serious, severe, often life-threatening condition that sometimes results in that person needing an amputation. All right, with regard to disorders of veins, the first two listed here are varicose veins. Varicose veins are basically enlarged veins or twisted veins. They're usually in the legs, and it's usually due to weakened valves that are causing the blood to pool. Hemorrhoids are also a specific type of varicose vein that usually occurs in the anal canal. All right, phlebitis and pulmonary embolism are two other ones. Phlebitis is inflammation of a vein, often due to blood clots, thrombophlebitis, which can cause pain, swelling, and also redness. And the other one, pulmonary embolism or PE, is a serious condition. It can be life-threatening, and it's where a blood clot breaks loose and it travels to the lungs and obstructs blood flow. So again, treatment and management is going to be key, or identification, treatment, and management are going to be key. So in some cases of the atherosclerosis, it might be treated through means such as angioplasty, which involves the doctor inserting a catheter with a balloon into that blocked artery and inflating the balloon in order to restore that blood flow back to that particular location. In terms of aneurysm formation, if we're talking about an arterial wall being weakened, they can bulge outward and form an aneurysm. If that aneurysm bursts, it can be a life-threatening condition for the patient because we have life-threatening bleeding going on that needs to be managed. In terms of varicose vein management, some treatments include things such as the person needing to wear compression stockings. Lifestyle changes can also help there, and also surgical procedures like laser therapy or vein stripping, they can also do that as well. All right, in terms of pulmonary embolism, some things that can be used to treat it are going to be things such as blood thinners. Also, compression devices can help, especially let's say the person is immobile. Compression devices, especially after surgery, can help prevent those blood clots from forming. So key takeaway here is basically in terms of blood vessel disorders, they can lead to serious complications if they're left untreated. So basically, early detection and also sometimes lifestyle modifications like exercise, diet. If you smoke, maybe quitting smoking can also help reduce some of these diseases. All right, and that concludes our lecture for this chapter. Hopefully this video is helpful as well as the other resources that we provided throughout the week.